Yeah, but they've got it drafted.
Good morning. Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting. If you can, please stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Last week we held a closed session pursuant to Government Code 54957 regarding a public employee discipline dismissal release with nothing to report. Under the consent agenda, item 6 is being pulled by Public Works. They still have some more work to do and they will bring it back at some later date. If any member of the board, staff, or public would like to pull any other consent agenda item, please let me know. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes on a 5-0. We stand in recess till 9:10. Tom, did you want to be in charge of this?
What? Oh, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to public comments. If there's any member of the public who has an item not on the agenda and under the jurisdiction of the Board of Supervisors, please come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. Gary Caldwell, Valley Springs. I just wanted to comment in reaction to an article I read in the Stockton Record this morning wherein Supervisor Tryon was once again complaining about decisions being made by bodies with unelected people on those bodies, and particularly the COG. And I wanted to remind particularly Supervisor Tryon that the board appoints a number of commissions and committees who, let's hope, those people are competent to act on the board's behalf. And I think if you look at the decisions that are made in land use area in Calaveras County, every decision except general plan designation and appeals that come before this board are made by an appointed planning commission. I want to say that once again. It's an appointed planning commission. Now, I have attended, I think, the members who sit on the COG board, COG council, pardon me, I said board. COG council are aware that I attend almost every council of governments meeting. And I've yet to hear Supervisor Tryon make a motion to remove any of the public members, even though he publicly says that the people that make the kinds of decisions that the COG makes should be elected. I wanted to also point out the last COG meeting, the item with respect to the wagon trail route over Highway 4, there were about 7 or 8 property owners in the audience who, and you may remember this, Supervisor Callaway, strode up to the podium here and complimented the COG staff. In fact, with respect to relations that they were having with them, the COG staff has gone out, met with them, told them what's going on, had a number of meetings, and are keeping the property owners who are affected by the right-of-way, potential right-of-way out there, keeping them apprised of what's going on with respect to the project. In fact, one of those who strode up to the microphone said, "I trust the COG staff." Now, you don't hear that very often where any property owner is going to say, "I trust any government official." I was pleasantly surprised to hear that stated by one of the property owners out there. So with respect to the COG, whether or not they're doing a good job, I think they're doing a good job, as I've always said, and I see that the efforts on the part of the Public Works Director to take over the Council of Governments projects is nothing but a hostile takeover by an ambitious man. Thank you.
Your comments were heard, Mr. Caldwell. For those of you standing, there are empty seats. Just feel free to come in. There's plenty of seats in there. Or you can stand as you choose. Does anyone else have an item they'd like to address? It will be. It's on the agenda.
Good morning, Rosemary Wilson from McCullamy Hill. I probably should have said this as you were approving the consent agenda, but there was some discussion last week about correspondence, and I know I've sat through many of these meetings, and probably item 2 has always been correspondence. But I just wondered whether you could clarify what, in fact, you were approving when under correspondence, sort of why correspondence
We are not required
is
to put
there.
correspondence on the agenda. We do, it's just sort of the culture of this county that we've done it, and all it's doing is acknowledging that we receive it. Any member of the board or public can pull a correspondence item. Copies of the correspondence are here, and it's also in the clerk's office if people would like to review it.
Thank you. So the items that appear under the correspondence list are items that one or other of the Board of Supervisors have deemed should go on
the clerk
list.
does. It's all information that goes to the clerk, that's mailed to the clerk of the boards, and they just list it.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. You know how many times I've sat here
and we probably receive individually a lot more.
Thank you.
But it is available, isn't it, at the clerk's office, and it's available right here at the boardroom.
Thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have an item they'd like to discuss not on the agenda and under the jurisdiction of the board?
Morning, Marty Crane, Valley Springs. My back is giving me an issue. If I end up going to the floor, just let me find my own way. Sadly, recent months have reminded us about the detrimental effects of allowing and encouraging divisions within our communities. We all now need to recognize these no-win tactics and move forward with the sense of community that drew us all here in the first place. I'd like to remind us all that October is not the only month that people deal with breast cancer and domestic violence. November is not the only month our seniors and vulnerable populations are faced with frightening daily struggles. September and October are not the only months our friends and neighbors deal with mental health and recovery issues. And April isn't the only month we celebrate youth mentoring and all the volunteer efforts across Calaveras and beyond. Let's please, all of us, now make a conscious effort to move forward as all-inclusive communities across our county, keeping in mind the struggles going on all around us. 2010 year-end presents us with many opportunities to be of help, be part of the solution, and spend time with our friends and neighbors. To that end, ladies and gentlemen, come Thanksgiving morning, you have an opportunity to work off that piece of pie before you eat it. The second annual Turkey Trot will happen on Thanksgiving morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a 1 mile or a 5K, or you can do both. I did both last year. I'm not in shape, but it's doable. It's a 1 mile or 5K walk/run. We're looking for sponsors, and I have entry forms for anyone who would like to be a sponsor or sign up for either the 1 mile or 5K. I will leave them here on the podium. Please take them. Last year, we realized that we didn't no longer had to walk with 1 foot in the grave. We were capable of a lot more than we thought. And because of that, we then moved on to Dancing with the Sierra Stars, which is coming up this Saturday, and we're still looking for votes, which is really money. You can go online to dancingwiththesierrastars.com and vote for your favorite couple. There are 6 couples, and Bill and I are doing a waltz, and thank goodness for that, because we're trying to hold ourselves physically together for this, but we're doing great. And it's lots of fun. It's at Ironstone. It's on Saturday at 6 o'clock, and I'll leave some. Is it okay to leave these here? Anybody that wants them can take them, or no?
Why don't you leave them underneath the counter?
Oh, okay. That's a good thing. I'll put it right there. Okay. But anyway, please remember to support the... I should tell you that the Dancing with the Sierra Stars is a second annual fundraiser for our Mark Twain St. Joseph's Hospital Foundation, and it's to raise money for the Family Medical Center and a Women's Medical Center in Angels Camp. So like I shared with you once before, it sounds like we may be getting a little bit closer to somebody, not me of course, someone having a baby intentionally in Calaveras County. So I leave you with that and look forward to seeing you on Saturday and on Thanksgiving morning.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Just a reminder, it's 5 minutes per person. No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you. You know, I'll remind you.
Yes.
Does anyone else have an item?
Good morning, Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. I hate following up Marty. She's always so upbeat, and I come on ragging about something. Over the past year and a half, I have made my appearance to complain about various issues. I think of one. It's when Gary Kuntz was eliminated from the Sheriff's Department, and I felt that was really not in our best interest. I spent some time ragging about the road department, not only when they butchered my trees, but also when they helped themselves to wood on Double Springs that did not belong to them. They spent over a week on Double Springs at taxpayers' expense, cutting wood into little chunk-sized pieces and representing themselves as collecting it for the senior wood giveaway program, which did not exist. What happened to that wood? Did they take it home and use it themselves, or did they sell it? I've started ragging about that last June, and I have not yet heard from Mr. Garcia about any answer what happened to that wood, who was responsible. And he, of course, would have access to those records to find out who that road crew was that represented themselves as collecting wood for a senior wood giveaway program. And lastly, of course, my main topic of complaint has been the public sorority and their band of groupies, which I think is an incredible waste of money, taxpayers' money. And so I've requested the IHSS Advisory Commission and the Public Authority to please present me with the documentation of their budget for the past 10 years. I'd like to see where that money goes. Apparently, the IHSS Advisory Committee has to have pre-authorization before they are allowed to expend any of their money. And I just wonder what $53,000 was spent on for the past 7 or 8 years. I know they're not willing to publish our little newsletter, our calendar yet, and neither was our union, SEIU UHW. They were not able to come up with the printing or the mailing costs. So once again, I'm here with my provider fund because I spent $250 this month mailing these to all the IHSS providers in Calaveras County. I have gotten some feedback that it's helpful to them, and I will continue to do it until one agency or another assists, or I will be begging every week for somebody to please help us at least pay for the stamps. And I would like to make a special request to each board member to see if you can come up with maybe $20 to put into this fund this week, because it's on my credit card. I mean, I haven't paid for it yet. And lastly, I'd just like to say that I've kind of gotten a reputation of being a big mouth smartass. And I am. I'm afraid somewhat that somebody else may come along and become a big mouth smartass and take away my title. Fortunately, thanks to Steve and Marita, I also have a secondary title as a pain-in-the-butt drama queen. So I would like to request that if I die next week, would somebody put one of those epitaphs or another on my tombstone, because I would hate to be forgotten for all the work I've done in the past year and a half, trying to raise awareness, trying to get people involved, trying to get some action where I have seen no action. And that's really all I have to say, and I thank you, except I will also leave a stack of the resource list that we've been able to create for Calaveras County resource list for seniors and disabled. And on the other side is the Calaveras County IHSS consumer provider resource list. And it's just not for people in IHSS. We've got lots of seniors and disabled in their homes who don't qualify for IHSS but could use this information.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Marty?
I just want to put this in.
Oh,
Thank
all
you,
right.
But I just want to tell you, you should talk to the senior center about your list.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Thank you.
My name is Terry Baker from Railroad Flat, and I'm here again for the third year in a row to beg you guys to please do something about the illegal agricultural cock ranch / cockfighting operation going on next door to us on a 4-acre piece of parcel in Railroad Flat. I've been here for 3 years trying to get something done here, and my neighbor continues breaking the law. She's been convicted 3 years ago and ordered to stop, and she just continues to continue. I'm going to read to you just something off of her website, if you can handle it. I've seen the Colonel fight. By the way, this is a tribute to the Colonel, one of the greatest roosters ever. I've seen the Colonel fight. He's very skilled. He could fight with another rooster, and most of the blood that he had on himself at the end of the fight was from the other bird. It was quite amazing to watch. He had this one rooster who thought he was big and bad enough to take on the rooster and ended up pretty bloody and kept coming back for more. He had lots of heart and spirit, but not the quickness required to come out the victor. Now, they had several hawks that were taking on trying to eat the chickens, but it says right here, the hawks won't be coming back. They're gone. They're done. Other times, a coyote would happen by and steal many of our younger birds. There was this one time during all of this that the Colonel lost some of his few precious tail feathers. The coyote won't be coming back. On his last daring attempt to defend his flock, he met his match. A bobcat came into the coop right around roosting time. And that bobcat won't be coming back. And what we're trying to tell you is they need 20 acres to have a cockfighting operation, okay? Not 4 acres. And they shouldn't have a cockfighting operation in a residential subdivision right outside of our windows, okay? It's very distracting to us, and it's illegal. Now, and when we went to court, Judge Moini ruled that this is not an agricultural operation, this is a hobby. And this is why he said this, because Mrs. Redmond showed him the pictures of the hens. They fight the roosters, but they dress the hens up like Cleopatra. Cleopatra, she's one of the greatest chickens in the world. She's just adorable. She's dressed up in jewels.
Mr. Baker, please address the board. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my next thing is, my question is we've been trying to have her cited for many, many years, and we've even gone down to the point of having a citizen's arrest filled out for them to stop this illegal operation. And twice in the noise nuisance meetings we had, Captain Jim Machado, I'm glad he's here, he said that if you get a conviction and these people don't stop, you can turn in a citizen's arrest and they will go out and cite them. I've turned into, my wife has turned into, my neighbors have turned into, my other neighbor has turned into. We got 8 citizens arrests just trying to put an end to this.
Mr.
And nobody
Baker.
will do anything. I'm just asking if Jim Machado can explain to us exactly how to go up again and do a citizen's arrest so somebody will listen to us. Jim, come on up, buddy.
Mr. Baker, your comments are to us, not to Captain Macedo. Mr. Baker, if you would like to discuss something with the captain, you can call and make an appointment with him. It will not be... Mr. Baker, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have an item they'd like to address?
Hello, I'm Clyde from Valley Springs. I was here last week and I pulled 3 things off the consent agenda, which was shocking to me. Now, I've been here for probably close to 30-some years. When they first started doing the code compliance violations, they used to take you to court. You'd go to court, you'd have a hearing. Then they quit doing that, and now we have a Star Chamber hearings and stuff, which are repugnant to a free society. They did away with them in 1641, and then shortly after that, they cut the king's head off for doing it. Now, this is from common law. This is what we're from. This is the way we're from. Now, we have gotten to the point when we went from court hearings to now just routine. It's non-controversial. Well, when our government starts seizing people's property and it's non-controversial, we have went to a place that I cannot imagine us going. How do we get there? How do we get there? I know I can't ask questions, but being a libertarian, it's real hard to understand how this can happen in a free society. Now, you're going to sit there and say, no, we didn't seize their property. We just put liens on the tax bill and stuff like that. But in 5 years, you will have the sheriff go out there with a gun and sell their property. Now, I don't know what you're going to do, because the gentleman just before me, I sympathize with him and stuff. But the point is, when we lose, our property rights are pretty well gone anyway. It's just an illusion what we have, but that illusion isn't even here now at this point. I mean, to me, it's just like it ripped my soul to see this happen. And I'm not trying to justify what's going on. I don't know if these are abandoned houses or something else. But to me, it should never be non-controversial to seize people's property. I don't know. Maybe I'm just from a different world, a different planet, or a different time. But this, to me, it should not be. It should at least be a generalized item. I mean, I don't want to see it going the way it's going. I mean, pretty soon, I guess you'll just send someone out and throw the people out of the house. But I think we're going in the wrong way. I mean, even at one time, Tommy Taylor said, you're not going to do anything in my district without me signing off on it. It was that controversial. Now,
Mr. Clapp, that is still the case. I want you to know. As Mr. Barr explained last time, if you would like details into how the process goes, it's become less costly for property owners than back in the 1600s or whenever you speak of. You can please make an appointment with Mr. Barr and go over the process.
Well, I know the process quite well. They used to have potlucks in Rancho Calaveras to collect money to sue me over property rights, which I've always prevailed on all of them. But the thing is, I don't care what me talking to the individual. My thing is the public, and the public should be goddamn scared, because I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have an item they'd like to address?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Josie Martinez-Ornum, and I'm with Mountain Oak Health Centers.
I'm sorry, who are you with?
Mountain Oak Health
Got
Centers.
it. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to update you on the progress of our clinic. Last month, we had our first Tee Up for Health golf tournament. We were able to raise funds to purchase our office supplies and equipment. We did very well. We had over 60 sponsors and donors for this event. Among them were Great America, Black Oak Casino, and the 2010 World Champion Series, San Francisco Giants. We started pre-registrations of patients last week. We were in 2 counties. We were in Amador and we were in Calaveras. We are actually capturing our targeted group, which are the uninsured. Last Saturday, we were able to hold a free flu vaccine clinic at this center. We were able to provide vaccinations for over 80 people. Our special thanks to Colleen Tracy and her staff for making this possible. And lastly, we would like to invite each and every one of you in the community for our grand opening on Monday, November 15th. We will have tours of the facility. You can meet our volunteers, and we will also hold another free flu vaccine clinic. The next day, we will be able to provide patient care. Just as a note, the clinic will be staffed with volunteers, appropriate volunteers, for a few months until we are able to raise enough funds to continue funding the clinic. So thank you very much.
Do you want to tell people where the clinic is?
The clinic is on at 556 Mountain Ranch Road. It's just at the corner. And our phone number is 498-2014. And everybody is welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other items before the board?
Joe Kelly, your agenda here shows the thing it's been showing as of past. Time limits shall be at the discretion of the chair. Now, I realize you're having a future agenda on the Brown Act with information brought by the CAO and County Council, and I would like to add some questions that they should answer at that time, but I want to present them to you, the board, and to them at this point. This concept of discretion of the chair, how does this assure the word ensure, E-N-S-U-R, in the Brown Act, that we are ensured sufficient time to speak our minds to you folks on agendized and non-agendized items? The other thing is something you had failed to do for quite a long time, and you brought it up this morning when the lady brought up about the correspondence. Your correspondence may not necessarily be something that you consider to be put out to the public for review prior to. But I would say that under Bill Lockyer, when he was Attorney General of the state of California, his Brown Act opinion states differently. If it's an agendized item, has a number, is printed on the agenda, it is an agenda item subject to public comment, to include closed sessions. And he specifically discusses closed sessions. So I would ask, be sure that the 2003 Bill Lockyer Attorney General opinion on the Brown Act be reviewed, and there's a whole lot of other Attorney General opinions on that item. So for this, when it comes up, and I'd like to see it happen before too long, because I believe our rights under the Brown Act are being violated, and you're doing it on a weekly basis. Thank you.
Your comments have been noted, Mr. Kelly. Does anyone else have an item not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. We're going to move to item 9. Mr. Packinger, are you taking this item?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good morning. Robert Packinger, Department of Public Works. As you may remember, Bruce Child, the county surveyor, retired about a year ago, and since that time he has been working with the county as interim. His time is now very limited. He can't continue working in that capacity, and so we went out, solicited proposals from the surveying community. 8 proposals were submitted and were evaluated. After the evaluation process and interview process, the best qualified consultant was selected, and that is Roger Pitto. So we have presented to you an agreement with Roger Pitto to be the county surveyor. The resolution will include the appointment of Roger Pitto to the position. Roger Pitto is here if you wish to speak with him.
Are there any questions or comments of Mr. Packinger from this board? Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item?
Joe Kelly, within your staff report, I see a lot of discussion of state and county, and that's all that is, but there are 2 noted conflict of interest codes that are noted. But the failure I see is noting Calaveras County's own conflict of interest code, which is under your code section 2. And the irony of it is that it is very specific in that no work to be done that would conflict with the job of his job with the county. So unless there's an attorney general opinion, as was with the assessor's office, contrary to that, how's it going to be bypassed legally?
I'm not clear I understand your question, Mr. Kelly.
Well, you have conflict of interest codes, correct?
Yes.
And ethics codes. County ordinances, section 2.
And the issue is it applies to the contract with the...
With Mr. Pitto. He is a contract employee.
Correct.
Okay. So 2.64560, prohibited activities, conflict of interest. No employee of the county shall engage in any employment activity or enterprise for compensation which is in any way incompatible with his or her duties as a county officer or employee or with the duties, functions, or responsibilities of the appointing authority or the county.
Yes.
There it is. How do you get around it? If he's going to be working here, is he going to be able to continue with his private business? I want to know because I've consulted him before. And yes. I need to know if I'll still be able to and that I won't jeopardize his employment.
I can let county council answer this, but the reality is if Mr. Pitto has a project that he works, he can have his own business, that conflicts with a surveying project with the county, he cannot do the surveying project with the county.
There's actually a section in the government code that covers the situation, section 27555, survey by disinterested persons where surveyor is the interested party. So the section deals with it and essentially requires that if he has a conflict, he either not do the work or someone else do the work.
Well, that's standard.
Yes.
For all conflicts. You excuse yourself if you have a conflict. That's not new or different.
Okay, so now we're at a new level here. What happens if he has to recuse himself? Who then steps in to fill the seat or his shoes as the surveyor?
Someone else would, as would happen under any circumstance.
But who?
Public Works will make that decision. the surveyors under the Public Works Department. The Public Works Department.
Yes, and as your staff report has said, is that Mr. Pito has excelled over the others that were looked at by whatever board agency there was for the choosing of him. So are you going to go to a lesser standard? Or are you going to have to go outside, bring somebody else in from outside to do this? Or are you going to keep it with people within the county that couldn't meet the standards that Mr. Pito met?
Well, if Mr. Pito is being hired because he has the best qualifications, then obviously you would probably you would find somebody that either didn't apply or somebody on the list that still meets the minimum qualifications, but perhaps didn't have, in the opinion of Public Works, the best qualifications. I mean, we have people have to step aside for conflicts all the time. I mean that's not unusual. I mean, it's unusual, but it's not like it doesn't happen a lot. I mean, it even happens up here at the board. It happens at the Planning Commission. It happens
With county council.
Even in county council's office, I guess. So, that's addressed appropriately when the issue comes up. Hopefully, there won't be a lot out there that will be in conflict. I mean, that will be certainly an unusual circumstance.
Why wait? Why not address the concept now and have it look to see to have somebody be able to step in? It might be something that has to move forward rather quickly. It might be something that's on fast track.
And if you put somebody on a retainer, then you pay additional money, and it's not an issue that requires that level. I mean, in the public defender's office, we have a conflicts attorney that we retain to deal with specific conflicts. But other than that, I don't know that we've ever put anybody and paid money to have somebody on a retainer for conflicts. I mean, it happens so unusually. We address it individually when the instance occurs. I don't see anything particularly different or complicated about that.
Well, it may not be to you. I just happen to go and look at your own codes, and to go a step back is it concerned me that it wouldn't happen to Mr. Pito as the way it happened to me on my application to the Assessment Appeals Board, where I was accused by the lady chair of having a conflict of interest, which in fact has never been answered to my questions of and reasons why I did not. So that was my reasoning to come forward with this your code conflict of interest.
Okay,
that we need to have standards here.
You should be addressing this issue on the basis of your personal
conflict of interest is a conflict of interest, sir. Okay. And the issue is here. Okay. Thank you.
I did have a question for Mr. Packinger, which does relate to the issue that just came up. My read of this document before us is that the current surveyor has about 4 hours availability per week, and that wasn't enough to keep up. I'm wondering whether he will continue to have 4 hours a week should it be needed in the way of backup in a conflict situation or otherwise. Is that your anticipation that that will continue?
That's correct.
I would imagine that availability might address the previously discussed issue.
That's in effect right now, so that there's also a transition period.
Thank you.
The conflict of interest was something that had been discussed, and it's also addressed in the services agreement with Mr. Pito.
Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary Caldwell, Valley Springs. I think Mr. Kelly raises a good point about having someone as a backup, and I don't think he suggested putting them on retainer. I think you could give the authority to the Public Works Department that they are able to hire someone when the case arises where there may be, whomever you enter in a contract with, there may be a conflict of interest as determined by county council. And I think that's probably a good idea because, as I recall, and I think most of you know, I was the county surveyor in Amador County. The county surveyor's office, I think, has only 20 days to examine a record of survey. So with respect to urgency, there may be in some instances urgency to meet those legal requirements. And the other thing with respect to particularly, and this is not necessary because it's Mr. Pitto, but he has in the past represented the development community at various presentations, made various presentations to the planning commissions and the board of supervisors. So there may be a time at which a conflict of interest may arise, or a apparent conflict of interest, and it probably isn't a bad idea to have somebody do the backup. And I did want to comment that apparently I'm not keeping a good enough eye on the Public Works Department's budget, because I didn't realize they had $75,000 to spend on county surveyor activities. And I was doing some number crunching, and if you take that approximately $75,000 and divide it by $6 per hour, if in fact only Mr. Pitto charged the county, that's 1,246 hours of service from Mr. Pitto that you would get for that $75,000. That's 7.3 months of service. If you took an average between Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Pitto at $50 an hour, you would get 1,496 hours of service. That's 8.8 months. And I just wonder if any consideration has been given to hiring a full-time person. I realize that in the staff report it said that there's not enough work in the county surveyor's activities to merit hiring a full-time person. But perhaps that person can be utilized to help out and assist in the preparation of project delivery with respect to, like, for example, the RIM projects. Since there's $7 million sitting on the table out there for RIM projects, maybe that same person could assist in getting those projects out and utilize that person besides the county surveyor activities. And the person that you hire doesn't necessarily have to be a licensed land surveyor, as long as that person operates under the direction of someone who is qualified as a licensed land surveyor. And I don't know if Mr. Garcia has the credentials to perform licensed land surveyor activities and county surveyor functions, but if he does, then the person that could be hired could be someone who is not necessarily a licensed land surveyor. The other suggestion I was going to make is that, and I was thinking of this before this issue came up, because I had heard that Bruce Childs was no longer going to be able to do the work, that maybe the board should think about rotating it. You had 8 proposers for this service. Maybe if there are 8 surveyors who are willing to perform the services, then maybe you should think about maybe every 3 months, quarterly or something, having a different office do it. And that way it sort of spreads the wealth. And also, by nature of the activities, which is checking on other surveyors, you have some potential for animosity there. And so if this could be alleviated by saying, okay, well, it's not always the same person who's criticizing your record of survey or your land division. By the way, the services also include reviewing tentative maps and final maps. You don't have someone who is the same person. So perhaps that way you would resolve both issues with respect to conflict of interest. You would be able to move it around so it's not the same person critiquing record surveys and maps every submittal, but you also then could have the next quarterly person would already be under contract and therefore be able to be the backup in the cases of conflict of interest. The other thing I would suggest is that you add into the contract that, Board of Registration has a publication out that's called the 2010 Guide to Engineering and Land Surveying for City and County Officials. I would suggest that you reference that, perhaps, that all work done by whomever it is, whether it's Mr. Pitto or whomever the surveyor might be, that all work is to be done in accordance with that guide and in accordance with Section 8700 of Business and Professions Code, 8700 et sequitur, Business and Professions Code. And speaking of Business and Professions Code, there is a requirement in there that when a licensed land surveyor or registered civil engineer like myself signs a contract, they have to put down their license number. I don't see the license number under Mr. Pitto's signature, so you may want to make sure that that license number appears or it's a violation of Business and Professions Code. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Caldwell. They're good points. This contract is for a year. I think we're going to see how it goes, and maybe changes might be done. In terms of the last comment on whether the license number, I'm assuming in the application process, Mr. Pitto's license was part of the application process. Whether it should be part of the contract, I can't address. If it's mandated that it is, then we will address that.
Section 8759. This is Veterans Code.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
It's warm in here. I need a nap. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Darrell Rusk. I live at 101 Melcher Lane, Burson, 772-0225. I have a question that's peripheral, not necessarily specific. When there are individual service contracts, whatever the nature of the contract, is there a background check done as if the individual were a county employee? I mean, if we're sending someone onto a piece of property, in this case, under the umbrella of the county authority, I'm just curious if a background check would be appropriate for individual service contracts. And I don't have an answer for that. I wondered if you might. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our HR manager is not here. I can't answer that question. I'm sure that's something that they do in the vetting process, but I can't answer your question specifically. Mr. Packinger, can you do that?
In agreements that we enter into, there are references provided, and references are all checked.
I think he meant a little bit more detail than that, but thank you, as we would for an employee. Thank you.
For consultant contracts, we don't normally enter into that type of screening for employees, but in this case, we have a long history with Roger Pitto, and so the reference checks is adequate.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? I want to bring it back to the board for any...
Roger wanted to say something.
No, only if we had questions for him.
He
Mr. Pitto, did you want to say something? Could you please come up? Thank you.
Do I sign it?
Yes, please.
I just very briefly wanted to say to the board and to the public, it is a great honor to me to be considered for this position. If I am selected, it'll be difficult to step in the footsteps, as us old surveyors like to call it, of our predecessor, Bruce Child, who has served this county almost 30 years. I will do my best to do that, and I have some pretty big feet to step into. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pitto. Are there any questions or comments from the board to Mr. Pitto or to staff?
Russ does.
Tom?
Russ has a comment.
Oh, Russ?
There may be others who will chime in on this, but I think that this particular item is cause for celebration, not bringing up questions of any ulterior motives or whatever. I think that the comments that were made about rotating that Mr. Caldwell made, I mean, that's specifically what I want to avoid. We've had a wonderful history with Bruce Childs, the 30-year historical, the organizational memory of the county and the knowledge of projects that have been approved in the past, and the wonderful benefits that are accrued by that knowledge. I think that it goes without saying that Roger Pitto is probably the singular person in the county that has an equivalent historic knowledge, and I'm just thrilled that he's available and can fill in this capacity. And like I say, there may be others that would want to chime in, but I'd be very pleased to make the motion that we follow the Public Works recommendation that the Board adopt the accompanying resolution appointing Roger R. Pitto, PLS as Calaveras County Surveyor, and authorizing execution of a professional service agreement between Calaveras County and Roger Pitto, PLS, for county surveyor services in the amount not to exceed $74,800 annually.
Is
I
there a
will second.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board on this? Mr. Packinger, with Mr. Caldwell, if it's required that his license be on the contract, if you could change
I will check
versus
into
on
that.
the application and the survey?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes on a 5-0. We're going to take a 3-minute recess before item 10. Thank you. I'd like to move to item 10, please, a presentation by the California Department of Conservation. I'm turning this over to Supervisor Tuffanelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the audience. This item that we're going to be discussing in a presentation given to us is in relation to the ball fields here in San Andreas. Recently, back in September, we had a Little League team out there practicing on one of the ball fields. And one of the kids was chasing the ball out in center field, and he came upon a depression in the ground about 4 foot wide, 4 foot down. And at the time, it was thought, it was brought to the attention of the Parks and Recs District of San Andreas and the groundskeeper. And at the time, they thought it was a broken sprinkler pipe because it had water in it, and they thought maybe the ground had settled because of all the water. Well, further investigation revealed that it was an old mine shaft in the middle of the ball field that had been plugged in who knows when they started excavating it. They called out a gentleman with a backhoe, Mr. Ron Pargett, and he dug down about 14 feet, and it revealed that it had a bunch of debris in it from the 20s and 30s. It had old bottles in it. They got a great collection of bottles, medical bottles from back in the 20s and 30s. And then it was eventually capped off. The top of it was capped off with a large boulder. No way. And what was amazing was the fact that this was turned into a ball field, and it was graded with huge equipment out there grading it and making it into what it was, and it was never discovered, or at least it wasn't brought to anybody's attention at the time if that was the case. And over time, due to rains and erosion, the boulder itself kind of sank down, allowing the topsoil to sink down also. And at that time, the county office of admin was alerted to it by the Parks and Recs District, who alerted the state to the issue, and it all came down to hiring an engineer to give us the correct direction on how to safely cap this off for hopefully what will be hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years, and it will never be an issue again. On November 4th, last Thursday, we had a little ceremony out there, and the state came, and Mr. Steve Jenkins, who I want to introduce at this time, was present, and he is from the California Department of Conservation, the Office of Mine Reclamations, and actually he represents the California Abandoned Mines Lands Program, and he's here along with Mr. Zach Collum from admin to give us a little presentation on this, and actually hopefully he brought a check with him for about $4,900 to help pay for this. So, thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Must require
just talk about this? Okay. I guess that steals my thunder because I was going to say, I'm Steve Jenkins, I'm from the state, and I'm here to help you.
I trust him.
And actually, that's more of a joke than it seems, because I used to be a county planning director up in Yolo County back in 96 when they had something called ERAF. It was a program where the state came to us and says, we have all these social service programs that we're not going to fund for you. So usually when you hear somebody coming from the state, you want to grab your wallet and make sure it's still there. But in any event, I appreciate the introduction. This is a photograph that I believe Zach or someone took that shows the actual completion of the work. It will be reseeded, and you'll never know that shaft was there. But basically what I wanted to do was come down and just share with you a little bit about our program, as I'm the manager of the California Abandoned Mine Program, let you know a little bit about what we do, because I'm interested in continuing this relationship with Calaveras County, and actually using this as maybe as a model and a basis for outreach to some of the other counties that have these same problems. So if you can indulge me for 10 minutes or so, I'll just run through some of these slides. And which one do I push next? Just click? Okay. All right. My program was created in 1997, and our sole purpose is to locate, prioritize, and attempt to close as many of the 47,000 abandoned mines that we've identified throughout the state. And our responsibility is for publicly owned land, not private land. Because as a state agency, if we get involved in closing, providing money to private property owners, that could be considered a gift of public funds and that type of thing. But statewide, using the topo maps as a base, we found that about 2/3 of the 47,000 abandoned mines are on federal land. A little less than 1/3 of those are on private land, and then the rest on state and local government. We have inventoried all of the state lands, state parks, state lands, and that type of thing, including Calaveras Big Trees. And we are now working with those individual state agencies to prioritize which ones should we put money towards closing. We also have contracts with the national parks to inventory, locate, and prioritize and help close about 5,300 abandoned mines on national parks. This is funded in large part through the stimulus funds. We have same contracts with Bureau of Land Management, both stimulus and non-stimulus money, to locate, prioritize, and close, including the Mother Lode District up here to the north. And I'll talk a little bit more specific to Calaveras County in a minute. As far as private land, though, the only thing we have is a phone number for people to call. And we've received about 200 phone calls from people that have neighbors that have abandoned mines, or dogs have fallen in some case people have fallen in these things. 1-877-OLD-MINE comes directly to us, and we then may go out and offer some expertise. We always tell them that they need to work with their local public works department or building department, working through geotechnical firms and that. But we have the expertise that we might be able to offer some suggestions in that. With respect to the private land, or before we go into private land, this doesn't show a lot, but the bright red are actually stars, and those are the closures that we have done. And the types of closures that we do are backfilling. Now that only applies to shafts that are fairly shallow, 30 feet or less. We're not going to backfill a 200-foot hole out in the middle of your ball field because it would just take too much dirt and that. We also will put fences around some shafts. Now these fences are not closures. These fences are warning devices. They're not permanent. They can be defeated. People can still go into the mines. But at least it's the first part of due diligence for private property owners or public property owners who have these abandoned mines on their property to at least provide warning to others. The other things that we do to close these mines, here's a horizontal adit that was inhabited by bats,
And what we did was we took a drain culvert and we had a contractor build a grate so the bats can fly in and out. This is not as cheap as backfilling. It's not as cheap as putting a fence around it, but still, this is a lot cheaper than putting some of the more substantial features that I'll show you in a minute. You may be familiar with the Western States 100 24-hour race from Squaw Valley down to Auburn. This is the trail, and the trail had an abandoned mine right here. These runners are coming by in the dark. Luckily, we didn't have an accident, but we were asked to put polyurethane foam to close this one up, which we did here. You can't even see it. Put about 2 feet of cover over the top of it. There's some of the more substantial openings. We put in the same type of feature as the culvert gate when we have bats and that need to, or barn owls that fly in and out of these things. We bolt these to the inside. And then if there's a vertical shaft and that are inhabited by critters that fly, we'll put a cupola over the top. These things can run $15,000, $20,000. These can be anywhere from a couple to $5,000 or $6,000. So it depends on the type of application that we use, but this is the kind of work that we do. Now, with respect to Calaveras County, we took that statewide inventory from the topo maps, and what we found was that the opposite of the statewide trend is that most of the mines that we have identified in your county are on private land and on federal, none on state land, none of Calaveras big trees that we could find, and none on local county land, including the park up here. It's just not in our database. It was unknown. When we went up and we investigated that one, we found some other features down below the hill that we now know about, but they're already protected. With respect to the federal ownership, we are currently working with Stanislaus Forest, Bureau of Land Management, and also the Bureau of Reclamation down here to inventory and work with them on closing some of the mines, the dangerous mines on their property. And when we prioritize these on public lands and that, we don't just go in and throw money at everything. We're looking for sites that are close to recreational trails, campgrounds, some place where people are going to visit and potentially fall in. The bulk of your abandoned mines in our database are on private property, which again we don't address. But there are various laws that can assist the county, many of which I know Brian Moss of your Environmental Health Department is aware of. I've talked to him about this. But there are health and safety code provisions that require people that own land or under contract of sale or lease to fence or secure property. There's nothing in the state law that prevents you from entering into your own ordinances and enforcement and that type of thing. There's also provisions in the government code that talk about the authority of the street superintendent, which would be your road commissioner or public works department or whatever, that identifies the definition of abandoned mine and allows the local legislative body, whether it's a city or county, to declare public nuisances and abate unsafe abandoned mines. What we find is if some of these are on private property and the property is already fenced, then people would have to trespass to get into that mine feature. But sometimes we do find properties that are unfenced and that. Another thing, having been a county planning director, one of the things that I found down in Monterey when they're updating their general plan is that they actually put a provision in there, because they have to address current mining through the SMARA provisions and that. They actually put a provision in their policies of their open space plan that the county will inventory, assess, and characterize certain mines, because they may be leaking acid mine drainage or whatever that could impact water quality requirements and that. But I thought that was pretty interesting that the county down there chose to address this in their general plan update. I believe you're doing a general plan update right now. What we did then was, of those private properties, we just, again, working with your GIS folks and Mr. Moss, we just did a quick download of your zoning ordinance provisions, We took all of the residential, the best we could determine. I know it's supposed to be yellow, not green. And then we just overlaid the abandoned mines that we had on private property, and we came up with about 29 of them. That's all we did. It's just a demonstration of how easily a lot of work can be done with your building department, planning department, and environmental health department, just using data that's already available. Building inspection is another area.
Yeah, so
Now, these things open up in ball fields, but they also open up under houses. And, you know, from a building inspection standpoint, I don't see a red tag on here anyplace, but, you know, again, the database...
Doesn't have much of a commute to go to work.
No, yeah, just fall right
Going
in
down
there.
to the mines and all.
Actually, the guy that owns his house is involved in abandoned mines, too, so it was quite by happenstance. But we have given our GIS database to Mr. Moss. So he has for the county what we have. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a brief minute. But what I'm interested in doing is sharing information back and forth. We'll talk about that. But an application comes in for a building permit, it's routed around to environmental health, it's, you know, wherever it goes, planning department for zoning consistency. You now have a database that, you know, you can at least plug into your checking and see if anything shows.
Steve, before you go away from that picture, it would appear to me from all that massive amount of concrete that's poured there that's very unusual. I mean, I would suspect that when that house was built, they certainly were aware of some unusual features here that they were trying to fill with that concrete. How in the world could that have been overlooked to that extent?
Yeah, I don't know the details on this. I believe this is up in Nevada County. I do know of a situation that maybe some of you or all of you have heard of up in Auburn area about 4 or 5 years ago, where a gentleman was in his house, in his chair, watching TV with his pregnant wife on the second floor of the house. All of a sudden, the house starts moving. The gentleman in the chair is sucked into a sinkhole, an abandoned mine. He dies. And I mean, it's like, how freaky is that? That's what happens on some of these. You don't even know that these mines exist. But what we're trying to do through our program and working with counties is at least start getting the databases out so we can start, you know, working with some of the private property owners through the county, you know, at least alerting them. Now, the issue on private properties, you talk to the high school kids, you talk to the people who have lived here a long time, they know where a lot of these things are, okay? But where is your growth coming from? You know, is it you're up in the hills? I don't know how much you get from the Bay Area or Sacramento or whatever. But you've got a lot of newcomers coming in here. They don't have that background. So again, part of our program through that 1870 old mine number is just to get the word out. I'm almost finished on this. Environmental health, again, Brian is aware of this. There are water quality issues that you can seek brownfield grants, which I know you come to the board recently. There's also environmental health. There's border zone requirements, or at least provisions in state law, where if you have, I think it's on the next slide, under the Health and Safety Code, the intent of the statute is to prevent brand new and incompatible land uses within 2,000 feet of a contaminated or hazardous waste site. And it focuses primarily on residences, hospitals, schools, any kind of a permanent human habitation. And what it does is, when you have a situation like this, it sets up a program where you can contact the Department of Toxics and Substance Control of the state. They can make a determination, or maybe your environmental health people can make a determination, so that when you cite land uses in your general plan update, you're aware of where the hazards are and you have provisions that you can avoid these incompatible uses. This is the final slide, and basically, how can we further work with you and help you? We are more than willing to bring down, at no cost, I'm not trying to get into your pockets or whatever, to bring our staff down to work with your GIS staff so that the database that we've given, they can understand how it works and how useful it is. We are happy to conduct inventories on other local government lands down here where, old timers or county staff may be aware of the potential for abandoned mines. No cost on that. We have certain inventory forms that we fill out to put into our GIS database, and we'd be happy to share that with your staff. And also, along that line, with respect to the private property, maybe even help conduct some outreach meetings, and let the people know about this. Again, we can partially fund, and we can fund. There's really no limit on how much we can fund. There's just different complexities, and based on how fast you needed to move on this, I gave you the maximum amount that I could within the time frame. And so there's a balance there of how much liability you have about an open hole versus how quickly you close the thing. But the other thing is that I only have a certain fixed amount of money that I get each year from the amount of gold and silver that's mined in the state. So I try to use as much of that in as many opportunities as I can. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to let you know that we're here. We enjoyed the working relationship, the fact that you guys called us, the staff called us, and we want to continue our relationship with you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, but that's basically it.
Are there any questions or comments the staff, the board has at this point? Are there any questions or comments from the audience at this time? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Gary, do you want to?
Yeah, Steve, I appreciate you coming here and your presentation. I'd like to introduce you to George White before you leave. I had a conversation with him. George is our department head for planning, and get with Brian, who you've already met. Hopefully you guys can set up a discussion for your help to come here and do the work that you gave our presentation on. A couple of things I want to bring up about the shaft here in the county is, and you touched on it, that when the guy with the backhoe came out, the contractor with the backhoe, he dug out to the extent that he could with the reach of his backhoe, which was 14 feet. Consequently, it was determined that this shaft could be up to 200 feet deep. And at the time, it was about 8 by 10. The hole itself, after they took the boulder off, was about 8 feet by 10 foot wide. Eventually, it was opened up to about 10 by 12 foot wide. And then what you saw back here, what was the finished product, I think they excavated the thing out to pretty close to 30 foot by 30 foot diameter. And actually what they did is they pie-shaped it down like this around the opening of it, and then they backfilled it with rock and then sediment, and then they capped it off with a 4 foot thick section of concrete, and then a 4 foot of topsoil over the top of that. And this is a procedure, as I talked to the contractor and the engineer that was involved in doing this, and this is a procedure that they've been using for the last 14 years to plug these mine shafts that occur like this. But there's a picture right there. That was before the boulder was actually removed, because I see it still sitting in there.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is the boulder that was removed. This is after it was dug out. And this is the concrete being pumped in there now. It's a little bit hard to see on the projector. I'm sorry.
Okay. So they actually put the boulder back in there and use it as, well, there you go. They didn't want to disturb that 1920s boulder that was the original cap, so they used it. But I want to also bring up the fact that when we were out there at this presentation, and there was a number of people from the state there, that the county, and especially admin and San Andreas Parks and Recs department, were given accolades by the state for doing everything right. They virtually did everything that they were supposed to do when this thing was discovered, and the state was very happy, and Steve mentioned that several times out there, that the county had done everything possibly that they could do correctly and proceeding for this abandoned mine shaft and getting it filled correctly and done right. And I want to give myself some recommendations or some accolades to Mr. Zach Collum here, and also the members of the board for the Parks and Rec in San Andreas for everything they did. It could have been a tragedy if it was left alone and maybe just filled back in, not knowing what was there. It could have been something like you saw the picture of the house where somebody was standing out playing center field on a softball, or a child in a baseball. It could have just been sucked down. It was in that state. That boulder was just about ready to fall back down in there. So thank you very much for everything that was done.
Yes, thank you. And there was also a woman in Public Works. Deborah?
Yes, Deborah.
Yeah, she was instrumental also in contacting us initially as well. So,
thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome.
So, thank you. This was just a presentation on
Yes.
non-action item.
Right, just a presentation on action item.
But we will accept the check.
Yeah.
But we will accept the check.
We'll just take a minute recess.
Well, we need to do an action, though.
No, that was
it's not action.
That was just an announcement as to what was.
Resolution accepting the check?
Yeah, but that was changed.
It was changed.
That lunch? Going? We'll be out here.
I was wondering, did you hear about that too?
I want to bring this meeting to back on the agenda, please. Yeah. The procedure will be that, since I'm assuming this might be a controversial topic, that staff will make any appropriate comments, board will be able to ask any questions. I'll ask other staff if they have any comments they wish to make. I will open it up to the public for any comments that they wish to make. This is on the amending of Chapter 17.91 of the Calaveras Code, and that's what the issue will be addressing. And there will be 5 minutes per person on any comments from the public. Mr. White, you're taking the lead on this, please.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. George White, Planning Director. As indicated, this item is the staff-initiated amendments to Chapter 1791 of the County Zoning Ordinance, otherwise known as the Medical Marijuana Dispensary section of the code. Staff believes that these amendments are necessary to bring the current code into compliance with state law and some recent court cases related to medical marijuana. The Planning Commission reviewed the proposed amendments on October 7th at their regular meeting. After hearing public testimony, primarily concerns from the Sheriff's Department, the Commission unanimously forwarded a recommendation to the Board not supporting the proposed amendments and further suggesting that the Board revisit the entire matter of whether dispensaries or collectives should be allowed in Calaveras County at all. The PC recommendation, or the Planning Commission recommendation, is reflected in the resolution attached to your packet. The ordinance that's before you today contains some changes that attempt to respond to some of the concerns that the sheriff raised during the Planning Commission proceeding, and those are explained in the staff report. I believe Captain Macedo from the Sheriff's Office is here and will address the board on this issue. I should also note that Janice Elliott from the County Counsel's Office is here to respond to any legal questions that the board may have. And that concludes my
Are there any
immediate
questions of
remarks.
Mr. White at this time? Captain Macedo, did you want to address the issue now, or did you want to wait?
I'd rather wait.
Okay. There's no questions or comments from the board at this time. I will open it up to the public for any comments or questions. If there are questions, they will be addressed at the end. So your questions, if you have any, will be addressed by staff at the end of the public comment period.
Hello, my comments are going to run a little longer than 5 minutes, so somebody think about getting up here and finish reading this for me. Okay? I need you to.
How much time did you need?
I should be able to do it in under 10.
Well, I'm trying to keep control of
Well, as I
this
said, I'll just
meeting.
pass it to another person who can
That's
continue
fine,
to
you
read.
can do that. Thank you.
I need to begin with a bit of a qualifying statement here. I'm going to be talking about collectives and dispensaries.
Excuse me, could you state your name for the record?
Thomas Liberty, Mountain Ranch,
Thank you.
Calaveras Patient Resources. I'm going to be making a distinction between collectives and dispensaries, a distinction which is not made in the new proposed code. I'm going to say some things that some dispensary advocates might not find pleasing. I don't want that to be construed by anybody as an opposition to dispensaries. I don't oppose dispensaries being part of our community. In regards to the code changes being considered, I appreciate the county is in a difficult position. It's trying to develop clear policy that will comply with state law and stand up to legal challenges and meet conflicting desires of local authorities. Hopefully there was also some concern thought about serving the patient community that the ordinance is going to actually affect the most. Unfortunately, in my opinion, this ordinance is clearly out of compliance with state law. It will be unable to stand up to any legal challenge. It's my belief that it will face legal challenge pretty immediately after, if it is passed. It muddies the waters terribly by claiming that a dispensary and a collective are the same thing, and it makes it almost impossible for the average patient to exercise their rights under 215 and 420 to cultivate their own medicine. The primary problem with the ordinance is that it makes no distinction between collectives and dispensaries. Section 17.91020 states that for the purpose of the ordinance, a dispensary and a collective will have the same meaning. The result is that the ordinance ends up sanctioning activities that were never intended by 215 or SB 420 and prohibiting the very activities that these laws were specifically designed to protect. Let me explain. Proposition 215 was passed 15 years ago so that patients could cultivate their own medicine. Senate Bill 420 was passed in 2003 in order to clarify some of the aspects of 215. And one of the things that it did was give patients the right to have community gardens and to grow for one another. These gardens were called collectives. In this model, legal patients associate with one another and with those that are able to cultivate medicine, provide medicine for patients that are unable to cultivate for themselves. There are no storefronts involved. This is usually smaller groups of people who have made arrangements amongst themselves to provide for each other. There is nothing in Proposition 215 or SB 420 that authorizes or describes any over-the-counter sales of marijuana. Nevertheless, storefronts started to spring up in some more permissive counties. And the marijuana stores were first called dispensaries, but then there was nothing in the law that defined a dispensary, so they started self-identifying themselves as collectives, presumably in order to help avoid prosecution. Over time, some people, especially those with little knowledge of the subject, have come to see the term dispensaries and collectives as interchangeable. At the present time, whether you know it or not, there are at least a dozen collectives that I'm aware of operating within the county. Some of them have been operating for 15 years. They're small, they're non-commercial, and they're discreet. As far as I know, there's been no outcry to develop new county codes in order to deal with them, and if you aren't a patient, you probably didn't even know they were there. Section 17.19.60 Part D of the proposed code states, quote, the total number of medical cannabis collectives within the unincorporated area of Calaveras County shall be limited to 4. We already have several times that number, and I don't see anything in the code, the proposed code, that's going to tell us how we're supposed to deal with that. A dispensary is, simply put, a marijuana store. This ordinance was developed as a response to the appearance of marijuana stores in our county. It was not intended to apply to collectives, at least I don't think it was. The problem is that this ordinance comes right out and says that collectives and dispensaries are the same thing. Whoever wrote this seems completely ignorant of the fact that the majority of collectives are comprised of small groups of people who don't have stores. Because of the wording of the ordinance, it will have a profound impact on these small collectives, even if that's not the original intent of the ordinance. It will also have a significant impact on the ability of legal patients to exercise the rights that they've already been guaranteed by state law by impacting their own ability to grow their own medicine. Section 17.91.010 says, quote, it is the purpose and intent of this chapter to regulate availability and or the distribution by whatever means of medical cannabis in the county. The term by whatever means clearly includes non-commercial private collectives. The proposed ordinance goes on to describe various and sundry rules and regulations that would apply to all collectives. These new regulations make non-commercial collective gardens impossible to operate. This approach is contrary to state law. It's contrary to SB 420, which clearly gives patients the right to form collectives outside of the constraints described in this new code. This is the rough one right here. Section 17.91.085, labeled medical cannabis produced for individual consumption, is baffling. I don't understand whoever wrote this, why all of a sudden they threw a couple of paragraphs in that had to do with private consumption when what they were trying to do, I think, was regulate pot stores. But here's what this part does. In an ordinance that's clearly intended to control the growth of storefronts, the author comes completely out of left field and makes outdoor growing by individual patients illegal in the county. Quote, medical cannabis cultivated and possessed at a private residence must not be visible from adjacent public areas or neighboring properties and must be secured within structures consisting of at least 4 walls and a roof with standard locks. 4 walls and a roof is a house. Okay? This means that under the new ordinance, growing your medicine outside would be illegal. Now, I've got a breakdown here, but the bottom line is if you've never grown medicine indoors, one person trying to grow enough medicine for a year inside costs about $2,200 a year. And that's them having to grow year-round and pay electricity bills, and there's can't be fire hazards involved with so many indoor grows all of a sudden. That same person can grow the same amount of medicine for themselves with 2 plants once a year. In addition to those financial concerns, the constraints that it puts on growing puts this at odds with 215 and 420. The section also says that nothing in this chapter shall be deemed to make unlawful an individual's cultivation of medical cannabis at their own residence for their own use, or by the use of another person regularly residing at the residence, which can be interpreted to mean that any medicine produced at somebody's home cannot leave that home and be used by another patient. The passage seems to be specifically aimed at the non-commercial collective member who is growing for patients that don't live where they live. As I've already pointed out, collective grows are already protected by state law. It boggles my mind that someone would try to slip into this ordinance the repeal of Propositions 215 and SB 420, but that's exactly what they did. Which brings me back to my earlier point about how this ordinance ends up sanctioning behavior that was never intended by the citizenry or the legislature and prohibiting behavior that's protected under state law. The ordinance sets up a system by which people can conceivably open up pot stores in the community, which was not the goal of 215 or 420, and it ends up specifically prohibiting the ability of patients to provide for themselves, which was the whole point of the original legislation. That's pretty bad. So how are you going to fix it? I think how you're going to fix it depends on what you actually want to do. If the goal of this code is to meet the needs of the community and to have a good code, I think that you need to start from scratch. I don't know who came up with this thing, but they did not seek the input of anybody, as far as I can tell, who knows anything about law or the medical marijuana field. I would organize a multidisciplinary team. I'd have somebody from the planning department, a supervisor or two, a couple of community members who have actual knowledge of evolving medical marijuana law, preferably with dispensary experience, maybe somebody from hospice, and most importantly, I'd have Gary Kuntz in there. It makes no sense to me that public pot policy is being made right now without Gary's input. Who's going to be the new? To me, that's like what, who thought of that? This committee could develop a clear plan with defined goals, and we could get a code that has a proactive vision that serves the community instead of this reactionary and whacked out document that I've been looking at. If the goal is simply to write a code that will make it really hard to open a dispensary and cover the county's proverbial legal buttocks, which I suspect is actually what's happening, I would suggest that you can just take the code that you've got, go back, strike out the whole section that involves 17.91.085, which talks about personal grows, and have the code make a clear distinction between storefront dispensaries and collectives. It should be clear that the code is intended to regulate over-the-counter dispensary sales and that the rights of individual patients under 215 and SB 420 to quietly, privately grow for one another is still intact.
Mr. Liberty, you've had your 10 minutes.
Thank you very much.
And do you have,
Finish this?
did you want to give copies of that to the clerk for the record of your comments?
You can have this one. I mean, I've only got one, or I can email them to you. Or
if you could give the copy to the clerk so we make sure we have all your comments. Thank you.
Can you start right there with the word hard?
You got it.
Thank you.
Reed Larson, state and county registered patient. Hard as it may be to believe, I have limited my comments to the portions of proposed code that violate the rights of patients to grow collectively, as that is my primary area of concern. Were I to speak the parts of the code that violate precedents set in their other jurisdictions in regards to dispensaries, I would be standing here for at least another hour, and several other people I would imagine as well. I sincerely mean no disrespect to the author of the code when I say there is no way the individual has any business doing any further work on the issue. This is the most poorly written dispensary ordinance I have ever seen, and I have seen quite a few. If I had hired someone to rewrite the code and this is what they had handed me, I would be asking for my money back, quick, fast, and in a hurry. In closing, I ask each of you to vote against this ordinance. I ask you not to give in the Chicken Little mentality. The sky is not falling, and there is no need to push through shoddy legislations due to false sense of urgency. Mr. Toffanelli, I appeal to you in particular, as it has fallen to you to represent the NIMBYs in San Andreas who are afraid a dispensary is about to open there, and may see this code as some kind of remedy. Help them to understand that while their feelings are valid, their concerns are not going to be properly addressed through passing another poorly written code. And to everyone on the board, I know some people are upset that there is a dispensary in Valley Springs, and some worry that more will follow. But in case you haven't noticed, the dispensary that opened, while it has irked some county officials, it has not disrupted our community in any significant way. The majority of citizens don't even know it's there. So please, let's slow down and aim and get this thing right. Otherwise, we're just going to be back here within a year rewriting the darn thing again. That's it.
I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions of Mr. Liberty? Thank you, Mr. Liberty.
All right.
Any questions or comments will be addressed later.
Thank you for listening to me again. I'm completely stoked to live in a place where I can just pop off.
Could the gentleman that finished, could you please give us your name for the record?
Yes, ma'am. Reed Larson.
Thank you.
Calvers County patient. I would also like to reiterate some of the inequities that I also see in the confusion in this bill. Specifically, in the patient's right to cultivate and consume on private property. And it does say that it states no patient can have a garden that is visible from an adjacent public or private parcel, which I'd like to point out being obviously ridiculous. That's at the bottom of page 7. At the top of page 8, it also states that a garden must have a minimum of 4 walls, a roof, and standard locks, which again I would interpret as meaning you cannot cultivate outdoors. So one must reasonably cultivate indoors, which is not necessarily financially or physically an option for some people, some patients. So I totally understand everybody's concern with wanting to regulate dispensaries in this county, absolutely, and just with the exception of this one small part, bottom page 7, top of page 8, personal consumption, I'd like serious deliberation and a lot of revision before this were to pass. And if it's just to regulate dispensaries, which is a great thing, you guys do what you got to do, I think this is a fantastic, start. I'm glad somebody's thinking about it. However, in terms of personal consumption, it's It's just not in the right place. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tom Reeves of San Andreas. I wrote a letter to Mr. Tofinelli, but it really applies to the entire board, and I'd like to read part of that, please. Mr. Tofinelli, as a resident of San Andreas, I urge your no vote on the draft marijuana ordinance being proposed for the following reasons. While I understand the objections to storefront collectives, even though I feel they're legal, I feel that Prop 215 and SB 420 give me the right to grow for a fellow patient. I am a cancer kidney survivor, and my wife of 34 years and I grow for a 67-year-old patient battling lung and other cancers. She is unable to grow her own and needs marijuana to tolerate chemo and radiation. This ordinance prevents compassion. Second is now you must grow indoors according to the proposal, and that gets very costly and will again prevent many from growing their own medicine. I could continue, but feel that you can see the problems with this poorly written ordinance and wish the county would more clearly define a collective as perhaps a group of 5 or 10 or something. This needs rework, though. Leave Grandma and Grandpa alone to make compassionate medicine, which I do for free for this lady. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Hi, my name is Mark Bolger. I'm from Mountain Ranch. First off, I'd like to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to speak on this issue. I understand the concern over proper zoning and regulation of dispensaries in our county, but I feel that this concern has greatly compromised patients' rights under Proposition 215. I believe one major problem with this ordinance that does not properly differentiate between a small collective of patients cultivating medicine together, almost always with a pre-existing relationship, from the storefront dispensary paradigm, where one can join and purchase medicine with neither party having prior interactions. I firmly believe that any dispensary owner that truly supports Proposition 215 would agree that both the health and the rights of the patient should be top priority for everyone here, two things that are grossly neglected under the new provisions of this ordinance. Several additions to the county's original ordinance go far beyond trying to properly zone or regulate medical marijuana dispensaries. Specifically, Section 1791085 is a clear violation of the rights of Californians to cultivate a medicine that their doctor has recommended for the treatment of their ailments. It is a mystery to me how the right to cultivate one's medicine on private property could ever fall into the category of regulating a storefront dispensary. A patient's right to cultivate one's own medicine has been guaranteed and upheld by our great state since 1996, regardless of the opinion of neighboring property owners or the number of walls surrounding the medicine. Many Calaveras residents have opted to use marijuana in place of habit-forming prescription drugs, a choice that their health insurance companies will not financially support. To afford their medicine, they grow their own. Many of these patients don't have parcels large enough to grow without their neighbors possibly noticing, and most don't have the finances to maintain a costly indoor setup. And while I completely agree with the ability and legality of a patient to purchase cannabis from a storefront dispensary in Calaveras County, I know this is not the main means of patients procuring medicine. To quote Sheriff Dennis Downham in regards to the viability of taxing marijuana through Proposition 19, quote, "In this neighborhood, hell, do you buy tomatoes in the summer and fall? I don't. I grow them." As a proud and concerned resident of Calaveras County, I implore the board to refrain from enacting an ordinance that blatantly disregards California state law. This can only lead to litigation that will do nothing but drain more county funds and increase our already poor financial situation. Given the impecunious state of both California and Calaveras governments, I don't suppose court proceedings are beneficial to either party. To close, I would like to quote John Locke, the philosopher who so greatly influenced our founding fathers. "All mankind, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions." Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bolger.
Hi, my name is Donna Miller. I am a medical marijuana patient, cancer survivor as well, ballet, track. I pretty much didn't do my bodies any good. I'm allergic to Vicodin, a lot of painkillers. I can't tolerate Tylenol. Mr. Liberty, very vast knowledge of numbers. I'm not going to throw those at you, but I think you represented us all very well up here in talking about the legal stuff, the collectives, the dispensaries. I'm one person. I grow for one person. I do have a cage. I keep livestock out of it. It does not have a ceiling, but like the horses can't get in. Surveillance system watching it at all times. I'm a very responsible grower. And you are taking away kind of, basically my ability to do that. Again, I'm allergic to Vicodin. I'm allergic to a lot of narcotics. I believe your estimate is very far under indoor growing.
Ms. Miller, could you just address the board?
I'm sorry. I looked into it going indoor after I heard about this, and we're talking 10,000 plus just to start. So it would. There's a lot of us. It would, really put a big kink in that have legitimate reasons for smoking medicine. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
One more?
We can have 5 more, doesn't it? It's open.
I'm Jay Smith, San Andreas. I'm a patient as well. These guys have Smith, Jay Smith. These guys have pretty much said it all. I just want to reconfirm, this is going to be a step backwards for Calaveras County. This is not well written at all, and it does need to be studied more. As simple as that. This is not the time to move this issue forward. When it's written, it's going to cost tons more money in litigation. It's not good for Calaveras County. It's not good for patients. And I would ask you guys to please study this further before voting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
I'm Clyde. I don't use dope or pot. I don't smoke. I don't drink. But I have 2 friends that lost their wives to cancer 20 years ago. Both these gentlemen had to go out on the street, find pot, which was illegal, for their wives because they were losing so much weight. Now, we just talked about last month being cancer. So I just see it looks like the board's trying to make decent people go out on the streets and look for drugs and stuff for a medical thing. And I voted for that to pass because of medical thing, because of personal relationships with friends and stuff. And I wish 19 would have passed and we wouldn't be here right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yo is fine.
Mike, what point?
Mike, what's your last name again?
B-U-L-L-A-R-D.
Thank you.
All this stuff being said, probably everything I'm going to say has been said. I'm flat broke, totally disabled, permanently. We live in a 600 square foot house on acres, family acres. I got room to grow weed in the house. Outside. I got to grow outside, period. Or buy weed from dispensary or collective, whatever, go to Sacramento, go here. You guys have no right to do that to me. It's on private property. I'm not bothering anybody, not doing any felonies. I've got documented proof that weed helps my emphysema. Why are you trying to take that away from me? Medicine costs big bucks. I got insurance, but the co-pays on that. I'm constantly going to the hospital, constantly buying meds. Don't take that from me, man. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Brook.
Right on.
Thank you.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm completely new to this.
Fine. To start with, giving us your name.
My name is Charles Sims.
Thank
I'm
you,
100% service-connected combat vet, living on a vet's disability pay. I have 5 family members. And with this new zoning, the way it's going, I have to grow my own medicine outside. It's just not feasible for me to do it inside 4 walls. Like I'm just repeating what everybody else has said. I've got liver cancer, messed up from the landmine. For you guys to pass this law or zoning issue the way that it is written, you're going to be hurting thousands of other residents that are just like me and the others here today. And I strongly urge you to vote no on that zoning deal and have it rewritten for the middlemen, the poor people. I don't want to go out and deal with drug dealers. You know, I don't grow for anybody else. I can only do it for myself. But at least I don't have to go to the criminal element to obtain my medicine. So I'd strongly urge reconsideration of this zoning law. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Sim. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to address this?
Hello, my name is Gretchen Seagrave. I'm a 60-year-old cancer survivor and medical cannabis user. I happen to believe that it saved my life. And I had cancer almost 20 years ago. And at the time, marijuana was not legal. So it was suggested to me by teens in the neighborhood, and they got my medicine for me. Or my son would go down to any local bar and talk to anybody and get it. But it was always sneaking around. It was always unlawful, and it was always fearful. And at one point, my son was arrested for possession of going out and illegally obtaining medicine for myself. The years that I tried to obtain it, like I said, were fearful. And now that I'm retired and have nothing to lose, I thought everybody should have a lawful place to go get their medicine, a safe, lawful place to go get their medicine. And I am the one, if you've heard, that is trying to open a legal collective here in San Andreas. And it's been hard. It's an uphill battle. To my knowledge, I'm the only one that's tried to do it legal and have met nothing but hurdles and obstacles, and it's very frustrating. I looked forward to the new ordinance, the draft ordinance, because I thought, from what I had heard, it was going to fix a variety of problems that we have with the existing ordinance, and it would also deal with the unlawful shop that you have in Valley Springs. And a lot of folks think that, my concern for the unlawful shop in Valley Springs is just sour grapes and that I don't want any competition. Clearly, that's not the case. Competition is healthy. I resent anybody that can go out and be given an unfair business advantage by the county by not having to comply with the law. I've been working on this project for approximately 2 years, meeting with all of the county officials, paying the required excessive permit fees, and now find myself facing hurdles that are going to be financially impossible to open my legal shop. This ordinance was supposed to deal with the unlawful shop in Valley Springs, and for those of you that were not present at the Planning Commission meeting, Captain Macedo told folks that this ordinance would be viewed as nothing more than a nuisance and the equivalent of the Sheriff's Department getting a call saying the dog is barking. And for that reason alone, I think that, this needs to go back to the drawing board. Other than that, I guess I have nothing to say.
Thank you.
I probably did, but I can't think of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty Crane, Valley Springs. It just occurs to me, I'm empathetic with all that we're hearing here today, and I don't take a stand either way on any of it. I just noticed that there is one thing that is blatantly missing, and that is we all lead by example, and where is the youth education in all of this? Because we already know that there's an issue with our children and drugs and marijuana and that sort of thing. But somewhere with this, I think we have to keep in mind how we educate our children. I think it needs to be part of the package. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Crane.
Good morning. My name is Larry Bridges. Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the board, I apologize because I really can't say that I'm prepared here because it was not my intent to address the board. However, I've heard a lot of conversation regarding patient rights and a county ordinance addressing those rights. I cannot believe that the members of this board are not familiar with patient rights and the laws that they exist right now today and have existed for years. I have to say that I'm not only disappointed, but I'm downright angry that this type of an ordinance would be presented and much less even considered by the board. Because clearly, this is an attack on patient rights. I want to clarify, I'm a business owner, been working in this court system and in this community now for 20 years. I do not support recreational use of marijuana. I do believe that there needs to be a safe access for patients that cannot grow their own. I do not believe in sales or dispensaries for profit. However, I believe that this proposed ordinance is an absolute abomination. And I would caution this board to take the time, if they have not done so, to read. I believe the most current case that just came down was Patient Resources, if I remember correctly, versus City of Anaheim. And I would suggest that you read that case. I believe it's a 4th District case that just came down, although it didn't specifically come to the issue as to whether or not the City of Anaheim had the authority or the right to ban and outlaw dispensaries within the city limits, because that issue actually wasn't presented on the appeal. It does very, very clearly define the patient's rights, the rights of a collective, and the rights to safe access. And I would suggest that before a decision is made on this ordinance, that the people of this board need to be familiar with that case, because I think it's probably one of the best that take all of these issues and all of the cases that have been going on now for 18 years, and it combines them together and makes it very clear. There's nothing vague, there's nothing ambiguous in that case as to what the patient's rights are as they apply to this current proposed ordinance. I would almost promise you that if you attempt to enact this ordinance, this county had better have a fair amount of funds set aside for legal defense, because I can almost promise you you're going to find heavy opposition, and I'm not threatening you myself because I will not be involved in that. But I can promise you you're going to find major lawsuits coming against this particular ordinance. Please reconsider and study what you're doing before you do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. Is there anyone else who has any comments before I close public comment and bring it back? Okay, thank you. Captain Macedo.
Good morning, Jim Macedo from the Sheriff's Office. Give me a moment. I have a few packets here.
Is this the document we already have or supplemental to it?
This is it. Well, I've had to combine 2 documents, so I think it's different. Before I begin, I want to advise the board that if this ordinance amending the county code were to allow marijuana to be dispensed by an appropriately educated, trained, licensed pharmacist, you would not see the sheriff's office in here with such strong opposition to this ordinance. The sheriff's office has worked with county council since this was brought before the planning commission, and we have made some progress. We agree on some issues. However, there are a few issues that we are still in disagreement upon. The first is the staff's recommendation for collectives or dispensaries. Why 4? We find 4 to be excessive. Supervisor Thomas, do you need me to?
We only had 4 of these apparently, Jim.
Sorry.
Madeline, do you have one? Could you just give it?
It does appear to be very similar to things we already know.
That's fine. We got it. Thanks, Jim.
As I was stating, we find 4 to be excessive. We think that is too many. 17.91.050 subsection B, we believe that there should be no persons under the age of 18 allowed inside the dispensary or collective, no exceptions. That includes employees and patients. We are also requesting paid professional licensed uniformed security be present during all hours of operation. Another question that I discussed with county council, and I don't think it's been addressed, is the manufacture of hash or hashish oil, or hash labs as they're often referred to. I'm concerned that not only does the sewer district not have knowledge, but the board does not have knowledge of some of the processes in which hash is manufactured. And some of those processes use butane or gas. What's going to happen to that material? What's going to happen to the byproduct of that manufacture? Is it going to be flushed into the sewer system? Is it going to be flushed into the storm drain system? And I did speak with Janice Elliott about CEQA relating to that, and she'll address you. We also wanted the hours of operation restricted. We do support the amendments on the hours of operation. We are opposed to any applicant or employee being a convicted felon or having a previous conviction of perjury, providing false information to a peace officer, or contributing to the delinquency of a minor. We do not want any firearms allowed inside the facilities. Again, with respect to CEQA, if they're going to be cultivating inside these facilities, are they going to be utilizing fertilizers? What's going to happen to those fertilizers? Are the surrounding businesses going to be notified that those fertilizers are in use? If marijuana is in fact medicinal and our proponents want safe access, why is this scheduled drug not being distributed by, again, an educated, trained, licensed pharmacist whose facility is inspected? Why are we going to allow
The captain has the floor, please.
Why are we going to allow this to be distributed out of a ramshackle environment on a storefront by somebody who is unlicensed and untrained and in a facility that is not inspected? Normally with medication, I think it's important to note that medication is strongly regulated. It's inspected by the Food and Drug Administration. There is an inspection conducted of the laboratories in which this medication is manufactured. There is a large amount of oversight, and I do not see that in this ordinance. The rest of my packet really relates to crimes associated with dispensaries, and I won't go through all of those, but I have a particular concern with robberies, and particularly armed robberies that are occurring at these facilities all over the state of California. And if you read the news or speak to people, they would like you to believe that there is a trend in the state of California to allow these dispensaries or collectives or storefronts to open. And I think if you look through the documents that I've given you, you'll find that those jurisdictions that have allowed these dispensaries and collectives, most recently of which was Fresno, They have realized the problems associated with these, and they've in fact gone the other direction, and you're now starting to see a large amount of counties that are either proposing a ordinance banning all outdoor cultivation, and or they are establishing a moratorium until this law can be straightened out. I agree with several of the people here that spoke about this ordinance. It's got some real serious issues, as does Proposition 215 and SB 420. They're poorly written laws. They're sloppy. They're what's causing the controversy. I know it was kind of convenient today to blame County Council, but County Council was working with a poorly, sloppy law, and she nor that office is to be blamed. In fact, a lot of the recommendations that were included in this recent ordinance were recommendations that I made. And I made those recommendations to County Council not arbitrarily, not to be difficult or to cause problems for those who are wanting to open a facility such as this, but I did those in response to what my counterparts in other counties and cities are seeing relating to crime and problems associated with these establishments. This is going to, if you open these and you allow these to open in the county, it is going to significantly and physically impact the sheriff's office. There are going to be calls for service that are going to come, and we are going to be expected to address these issues. We are already receiving calls. We are currently investigating a drug-related homicide in this county. So for everybody to say, oh, these robberies and these crimes that occur, these ancillary crimes that occur associated with dispensaries or collectives or drugs is something that happens somewhere else, that is not the case. The homicide I'm referring to occurred in San Andreas. So I guess what I'm saying, or what I'm asking the board to look at, is to look at this from two perspectives. If you recall, a few years ago, I came before you and presented you with a staffing plan explaining to you that we were short-handed and understaffed and that we needed more staff. We then had this terrible financial meltdown, and we haven't been back to you asking for more staff, but our calls for service have not gone down, our demands have not gone down, and here today we're considering authorizing the establishment of 4 of these, which will ultimately impact my organization, our calls for service, and your constituents' ability to resolve their own problems, or to have us assist them in resolving their problems. Finally, I did meet with the United States Attorney's Office 2 weeks ago, and this was prior to the vote. And there is a letter attached in that package. And if you note, the Attorney General really was writing the letter in concern about the possible or the potential passage of Prop 19. But I think they were very clear in stating that they still believe marijuana and the possession, cultivation, and sales is a federal crime. Why the County of Calaveras and the Board of Supervisors would authorize anyone to establish 4 dispensaries to violate federal law is beyond me. I think that's very concerning, because you're not only going to place the people you authorize to do this in a very difficult situation, you're also placing the sheriff's office and local law enforcement in a very difficult situation. They made it very clear in this letter that they are still going to enforce federal law. I'm also concerned, being a county employee, from a public appearance standpoint, why would we allow somebody to open a dispensary and have the federal government step in 6 months or a year, and then we're going to take that back away from them? To me, that gives the appearance that the county doesn't know what they're doing, and that we're basically moving too hastily, and we're not waiting to see how things flesh out. I think I'm going to conclude my comments with that. I do not support the ordinance. However, those conditions were placed in there, and those conditions and recommendations I'm asking for were in the event specifically that you guys approved it and authorized it. But we are opposed to the ordinance as a whole. But we do support some of the new recommendations if you were in fact going to pass this ordinance. I'm in a difficult situation because we don't support it to begin with, but if we're going to be forced to live with it, we would like our recommendations to be considered, and we'd like those to stand. Thank you.
Any questions of Captain Macedo? Any comments? Thank you. No, it's now the staff's turn. I've closed public comment.
Chairman Callaway, or Chairperson Callaway, I have a question for Captain Macedo. Captain Macedo, we've heard various people make reference to the fact that they also agree with you that there's significant flaws in this ordinance as presented. They have suggested that there might be some benefit in setting up a committee, a task force or something to work out their versions of what they'd like to see, and also take in consideration the sheriff's issues. What's your personal feeling? I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily, but do you see any traction in that idea?
I do not, and professionally speaking, I'm opposed to that. You have very capable county council in this county. They are well versed. The case regarding Anaheim that was cited earlier today in public comment, Janice Elliott is very familiar with that, and she's very capable, as is Jim Jones and the rest of his office. If people want to submit input for review, there is a mechanism which they're utilizing today to submit input. I purposely waited until the end because I wanted to hear what the public comment was regarding to this, and I will take some of that into account. So I'm not opposed to a committee. We have plenty of committees in this county, and sometimes committees just meet to have meetings, and very little work gets done because people can't agree. While I think the principle behind getting the public involved is good, I just don't see it ultimately ending up in a benefit in a law that's so poorly written and it's yet to be sorted out. I wish I could tell you when it is going to be sorted out, but unfortunately, in my opinion, both the state and federal government have been extremely slow in resolving this issue. I think one thing that everybody in the room could agree on, we would all like clarity, and that's what we don't have. And that's why I'm proposing you don't act on this, and that you establish or enable a moratorium until this does get worked out.
So you're asking for a moratorium on this?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Until. No, the public comment period is closed. I mean, if you'd like to talk with Captain Macedo afterwards, he's available. Okay. All right, I'd like to move back to staff. Ms. Elliott, Mr. White, did you want to address the questions or comments?
Janice Elliott, County Counsel's Office. First, to note that you've obviously heard a threat of litigation. To the extent you need legal advice, we would need to do that in a closed session. I would just note that I would agree that the state of the law, as you well know, is unsettled. However, I would disagree with the statements that says the county lacks the ability to regulate certain types of these uses as a land use. The law, so far, the courts have upheld the regulation of this as a land use. We are not proposing to ban dispensaries or collectives. That is the issue that was addressed in the City of Anaheim case, and not actually completely decided by the court. It was sent back to the trial court, but that involved an ordinance that banned this particular use. I would also note in your board packet that I included for you language out of the Attorney General guidelines. And the Attorney General is supposed to be updating those guidelines, but they're not out yet. But you will note that the Attorney General has stated that there is no such thing as a dispensary. A dispensary is actually a collective that complies with the health and safety code provisions. The attempt at this ordinance to amend it, and you'll also note this ordinance has been around since 2005. It was originally adopted in response to an inquiry from an applicant that wanted to open up what we then called a dispensary, and the board at that time adopted this ordinance based on a template ordinance that was circulating around the state of California, and there was no opposition to that. These amendments, I would note, are drawn primarily from the City of Stockton ordinance that was recently adopted after, I believe, almost a year of study by various stakeholders. It's not new language, it's language that they put together and adopted. The other language that's at issue here with respect to personal growing of marijuana, that is drawn from other ordinances also, primarily up in the northern part of the state of California in Humboldt and Del Norte, who have been dealing with these issues a lot more than this county has. It's right out of their ordinances. The attempt here was to make a distinction between people growing it and sharing it, which is authorized under Prop 215 as a defense to a criminal prosecution. It has nothing to do with land use. And the number that was put in the ordinance, which is up to 4 people, is drawn from other ordinances that have been adopted throughout the state of California. That number is obviously up to the Board of Supervisors to make that determination, as noted in the staff report. All of the other amendments were to try to accommodate the sheriff's concerns and the ongoing evidence. You'll see from other counties that there are issues with people growing it in their backyard. There are criminal activities associated with that. It's up to the board to decide whether or not they want to strike that language or amend that language or ask for more information on that language. But there really is no distinction when you get down to the definition of a collective and a dispensary, because there is no such thing as a dispensary in state law. It is a group of people who get together who are qualified patients or caregivers, and they basically share the medical marijuana after receiving a recommendation by a doctor, which makes you a qualified patient or caregiver. And so the intent here was to actually legalize some of these collectives that are already in existence, because the county's position is that that is a land use, and if it's not in our zoning code, then it is illegal land use. So if you are growing medical marijuana in your backyard at this point, and you are sharing it with other people, and you constitute a collective, then it's the county's position that you're a land use that needs to be authorized under our zoning code. So that was the attempt here by borrowing from other county's ordinances. There's nothing in here intended to dissuade people from doing that, but I would note that Prop 215 and the health and safety codes are all addressed towards basically defenses to criminal prosecutions, and the courts have held that the county has the right to regulate these uses as a land use until such time as there's a binding California Supreme Court case or U.S. Supreme Court case that says otherwise. That's what the goal of this ordinance was. So if you have any questions. I believe all of Captain Macito's questions were already addressed in the staff report.
Yes, I for what appreciated those responses and read them. I do have a question that's, I think, fundamental to the issue, at least a lot of the comments that have come before us today. And looking at the history, you can see how we got here. Prop 215 talked about collectives. We have an Attorney General's opinion that kind of waded through it, but not particularly definitively. And we have SB 420, which I guess from that, a number of places decided that storefront operations were part of that, dispensaries. What I'm interested in from a legal point of view, I know there's a lot of policy issues that are aside from this, and we're going to have to grapple with those in a moment. But from a legal perspective, is there any distinction to be made? Because I'm not sure this ordinance before us, the draft, does this. But do you feel that there's a legal basis for making a distinction between dispensaries and storefront operations, which, in my view, this addresses to some extent, and the operations that are currently underway across this county and across this state that are the collectives that formed under Prop 215 and are growing patients, growing for each other, groups of people that came together to make those arrangements consistent in their belief with Prop 215. Our ordinance does not address that distinction. It kind of it seems to me that it's treating it all as one under land use and almost all other considerations. What's the basis for that, not making the distinction, and is there a basis for making one?
Well, I'll go back to the bullet point from the Attorney General guidelines, which is really the only statement so far on that particular issue, because all the case law currently that is citable to has to do with bans on dispensaries. There are other cases working their way through the courts. There's an issue down in L.A. County that's being litigated with respect to limiting the number of dispensaries. But if you look at the bullet point from the Attorney General guidelines, it basically says there is no such thing as a dispensary. a dispensary needs to meet all the qualifications as a collective. So basically what you're asking here is, if you look at it in a different way, it's more of a different type of land use, because a collective can operate as a storefront collective, which is what we are addressing here. But a collective is also defined as people who get together and grow it and share it among themselves, as long as they qualify under the health and safety code issues. The really only difference here is the location of these. One's in a storefront, one's probably on some sort of type of agricultural land, which we don't address in our code. So until you address that and you make it a legal use, it's the county's position that that would be an illegal land use. And that was the attempt here to try to qualify the difference here by using the numbers from other ordinances that says 4 or more people can get together and be a collective, and they're not addressed in here. That's something that you can do. You don't have to be a storefront, and you don't have to be in the CP zoning district. If the board wants to change that, that's clearly a policy decision. But when you look at it, the only difference between the collective and the dispensary is where they're located. And if the dispensary is operating legally, it should be operating the same way as the collective is operating. That may not be what's happening, but that's what it's supposed to be doing.
Okay, I understand. We'll get to the policy things, I'm sure. I've got a couple of other questions that I think are legal. You can tell me whether or not they are. On the question of firearms in a retail operation, do we have any other businesses? I know we have schools that don't have firearms, and we have a number of other places, but for retail businesses, and I want to just outline a couple, how about convenience stores? How about liquor stores? How about pharmacies? How about hospitals? What are the rules in relation to firearms within those facilities?
Well, I can only speak to respect to Title 17, and there's no language in Title 17 regarding that. I'm sure there's state law that covers that. I defer to Captain Macedo on that particular issue. They're not addressed in Title 17.
All right. Let me give the list, and maybe between you can let me know. But I'm curious about what regulations we have about hours of operations for other types of retail facilities. And I guess those are the two.
With respect to possession of firearms, a person has a right to possess a firearm in their private business. But what I want to caution you on, and this is what is potentially scary to those that want to get involved in this type of enterprise, there are specific laws with heavy enhanced penalties, both in the state codes and the federal codes, relating to trafficking in narcotics or controlled substances while being armed. So, theoretically speaking, if you authorize somebody to sell marijuana and they are armed, you don't have to charge them with the sales of marijuana. They can be criminally prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to a very long sentence for being armed during the commission of that act. So, I think, in my opinion, if you're authorizing this, you're jeopardizing those people, because I think you're giving them a false sense of hope that they are going to be immune from prosecution. However, that's only relating to the drug laws. There's nothing in here that's going to give them a clean slate or authorize them to be armed during the commission of those acts, both in state court and federal court, because there is no waiver associated with Prop 215 or SB 420 or any of this stuff that allows somebody to be armed. So I think that's a perilous act on behalf of the county to do that.
While I thank you for trying to protect people from themselves, I do have a question about this. I thought we were dealing with a question of medical marijuana, and I guess there's still a debate, and I don't know whether the Sheriff's Department is making law, interpreting law, or enforcing law, but I thought we were trying to figure out what our ordinance was going to be in relation to medical marijuana. And I really want to try to, is there a legal distinction between the drug laws and drug enforcement and recreational, all that stuff, and what we're talking about here? That's my last legal question, but it seems to me that there's two areas of law, and we're mixing and matching those in this discussion today. I want to get clear on the context for us here.
I would just respond that the ordinance has always stated that operation of this type of facility needs to be in compliance with state and federal law. So if that, in fact, is the state law, that's criminal law, which is not my area of expertise, then there's nothing in this ordinance that that preempts the fact that you need to comply with state and federal law. So Whether or not you want to put that actually into the ordinance, that's within your...
Just dispensing that you're not conforming with state, well, you are state, not federal law.
No, according to the City of Anaheim case, the state law is not preempted by federal law.
Right, okay, that's what I was kind of getting to. Right. Thank you.
I do believe that issue will probably end up at least to the California Supreme Court, but as of right now, there's an appellate court decision that says you cannot ban dispensaries or collectives on the basis that federal law says marijuana is illegal.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
That's a state court.
That's a state appellate court. It got sent back to the trial court on a different issue, which had to do whether or not a land use ordinance can criminalize anybody who violates that land use ordinance. So that issue has yet to be decided. But this ordinance is deleting the criminal provisions from the ordinance because I don't know where that's going to go, to be honest with you. This area of law is unsettled and changing on a daily basis.
For me, this is a land use ordinance. This is not a criminal or sheriff's ordinance. When this was passed in the state, I think Ms. Boyce was the one that put together a committee. We had public meetings here. We were the second or third county in the state of California to put in what the criteria, how many dried ounces, how many plants, because there were no state guidelines at the time. And we had law enforcement, we had physicians, we had pharmacists that were part of that public process, and physicians who saw different sides of the issue. Now we fast forward to 2005. We put an ordinance together. We haven't been litigated on our ordinance. So, Evan, if people want to threaten us, you've got something to threaten us on. But today's changes are still a land use. It is not saying good, bad, or otherwise. I do have some concerns or questions that I'd like to throw out. One is in terms of growing, where we grow, i.e. you mentioned possibly on ag land. You know, if you live in a subdivision and you want to grow 2 plants and you're not zone ag, you're R1, can you do it there? We really don't address that. And the difference then between growing, for maybe as Ms. Miller said, I'm not sure that I understood, growing for herself or herself and the person she's caring for could be in your backyard. If you're growing for a collective, should we have something in this? And I guess I asked the board, it's a policy decision on modifying the ordinance to where people could grow, i.e. in an industrial area on ag land. And I think we need to address that issue. In terms of the sheriff's concern about having firearms or uniform security, to me that would be part of the conditional use process, and we could just say in the ordinance that the sheriff's office will be making comments on a case-by-case basis on what the conditions are, the same as any conditional use permit. So I think we need to separate that out. On number 050G, I really wasn't clear on products. If you have a collective, if paraphernalia would be excluded from that. It just says no collective shall engage in the commercial sale of product, good, or service. Yet if you have papers, pipes, or what have you, is that considered a product and could or could not be sold in a collective? I think what we're trying to do here is just upgrade our existing code to what has happened with cases that have appeared before the courts in California. I don't think we're trying to be avant-garde in what we're trying to establish. We have the authority to limit the number of dispensaries or collectives. And under court cases, we can do that. Is that not correct, Counselor?
Under current case law,
correct.
That issue is still evolving in the courts based on the particular ordinance at issue. But there is current case law that says it can't be regulated as a land use.
So if, as the Sheriff's Office is saying, to let the dust settle on the law, we've been waiting for the dust to settle for years, and I think we need to deal with what it is that we have before us now and move forward. Remembering this is a land use issue, this is not a criminal issue from my perspective. I had many questions that I emailed counsel over the weekend. I guess I don't need to go into them. She answered. I'm more than happy to share it with the board. But I guess staff is looking for some direction on what they would like done with this ordinance. Would you like it to go back to the drawing board? And if you do, what is it that you're looking for staff to do?
Let me make a suggestion here, because from what I'm hearing, the primary issues from those who use this product are related to the new section 17.05.
Being able to grow outside within 4
Right,
miles of the roof.
right, which comes out of another ordinance. There are counties who were before the election vote, who now will have to address it even more. A lot of them were waiting to see what happened last week, who are addressing it similar to an agricultural use, because that's a location where it's often grown. There is one county who's currently litigating whether or not you can limit the size of the plot, the number of plants, et cetera, as a land use. There are other examples. If the board would like to see examples of what those ordinances say, then you could direct staff to bring that back to address some of these issues where people are growing it out, I'm assuming probably in very rural areas.
Not with their addresses.
No, no, but you can also, I don't know what the lot sizes are at issue, but this is another issue where you can have setbacks, minimum parcel sizes, and zoning issues. Those are all easily fixable if that's the board's direction. If you want to tie how it is grown outside to the size of the lot, the zoning, and if you have a neighbor right next door, those are things that are already being addressed by other counties, and I can give you examples of those. The issue, to make a distinction between a collective and dispensary, which is the other issues that's raised here, again, I go back to the fact that there is no such thing as a dispensary. It's simply the location and the zoning of where it's at. But it is possible, if you want to address the collectives that are growing rural, and put some limitations on those, because in essence they could potentially operate like a storefront if they got large enough. Then that's something that you can do, and then maybe when we make those available for the public to comment on, they can see something that works for them, and we can bring it back for further discussion if you'd like. That was never the intent, but we do need to regulate them, because I was personally unaware that there were that many in the county. I've heard of some, but I did not know we had that many.
Well, this ordinance does address some of those issues that they have. It contradicts itself a little bit, because you go to 17.91.085, cannabis produced for individual consumption. It says nothing in this chapter shall be deemed to make it unlawful an individual's cultivation of medical cannabis at their own residence for their own use, or for the use of by another person regularly residing at such residence. Is such cultivation, possession, or use is lawful under Health and Safety Code, Section 11362.7 through 11362.77. So it kind of addresses the point, although it does say about having to grow it under 4 walls in a roof, within 4 walls in a roof, with standard locks in it. So I think maybe some work being done on that section of it. to clarify the fact that we're not trying to, I don't want to see people put out of business that are growing it for the legal purposes that they are entitled to under 215. And it is kind of a little bit not clarified here enough in what the wording is in this thing. The four wall, I don't know where the four walls and a roof, other than it's mentioned in the Stockton one that you attached to here, and I don't know where they were going with that either, other than there are a lot of small residential lots there, and they're trying to not define it within types of zoning there, and try and keep it open, but at the same time they were trying to keep it out of sight from people, or in my opinion having some way of having a lock on something where somebody just knows you're growing it and want to come in and try and steal it. I think that was probably the purpose that they were trying to do.
Well, it's a much more urban area than
Yes.
this particular county, but there are other more rural counties that have addressed it more as an agricultural use, if that's the way the board wants to go.
Janice, is that agricultural use by number of plants? So if you have 2 plants, it's not, but if you're going to do 10 or more for the collective?
There's various ways to address it. All the counties are dealing with this differently right now because it is sort of an area of law where, how big do you want the collective to be? One of the other issues we have is we have many zoning districts that say, you have a road impact from a particular use. If we have, I have no idea what they're doing, but let's say you have 100 people that come there once a week, what's the difference between that and the issue that we had with all those other agricultural uses when we amended the Ag Zoning Code? I doubt they're complying with that section in there that says if you have more of a traffic impact than one residence, you need to pay for mitigation to the road. So there's lots of issues related to that don't fit well into our current Ag Zoning Code, but there are examples that I can give you on that. And I do think it's an issue of setbacks, parcel size, and what zoning district you'd want to have in it and what size. So.
Again, I'm not sure if that's going to suffice because we have people that live in homes here in San Andreas, just not ag, that probably grow a couple plants. We had testimony from one gentleman that grows 2 a year, and that suffices for it. Well, I don't see that being an ag.
Right, but that would not meet the definition of a collective per se, which is what we're really addressing here. Right now, the collective is triggered by 4.
Well, it would if they were growing it for somebody else or, say, 2 other patients that were unable to grow it for themselves. That could be considered a collective.
Not as defined right now.
Not as
Right
defined.
now, the number is 4. But that's because that's what most of the counties were using. If you want to change that number, that's obviously up to you. But if you're growing it for up to 4. Now, this language in here that says that somebody has to be residing in the house, you can easily delete that language, and then the collective definition would apply at that point in time. There's no easy solution to this, is all I can say. But I don't think it's the county's intent to say or to even try to regulate your personal use or perhaps one other person's personal use in your backyard or your house. That's not the intent here.
Mr. Tryon, did you have any comments?
I'll just give my comments then. First off, just as an overview statement, I am very much in favor of doing all that the state law allows to accommodate the medicinal use of marijuana. So I am not in any way wanting to limit that use. On the issues before us, I don't want to shut down what's currently working in the county, and if there are a lot of very small, let's say there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 people, I want to allow that. So maybe what we should do, if we're going to say 4 dispensaries or 2 or whatever the number is, but make an exemption for those that have less, or the collectives that have less than 10 people or 15 people or something, so that you can just allow the little guy to just take care of their needs, family and friends and personal needs, et cetera, as opposed to someone that may have a more commercial intent and the like. So I would be in favor of doing that, and like you said, maybe it's more than just one person, or they have to live at the house or something. Secondly, I am for allowing the outdoor growing of marijuana. I mean, we always talk about marijuana like it's some great thing. It's just another plant that people use for different reasons. And in the sheriff, they talk about, well, maybe needing CEQA because they use fertilizers and pesticides. Well, geez, at the house, we use that all the time. I mean, we fertilize the lawn, and we kill the pests on the rose bushes, and we do all those things. So I don't view, and we live on a bigger lot in Angels, and my wife has a nice garden down below, and we grow tomatoes and squash and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, what's the difference between that and just growing 30 or 40 marijuana plants? Who cares? I mean, it's just something else you're growing. You're going to plant something. I have a hard time sort of differentiating that this is some big deal to do on your quarter-acre lot. It isn't any more than the landscaping we currently maintain, and we use pesticides and herbicides on the current landscaping. So to me, it's just not, if somebody sees it, I guess they could come steal the roses, but they don't, and hopefully they would just leave your 8 or 10 marijuana plants alone. So I guess to me it always seems like we're making a much bigger deal out of it than it need be, at least. This could cost me the next election, then. At least when it comes to the medicinal side. I don't see how anybody can have an argument with the medicinal side of marijuana. I mean, I don't have an argument. Particularly, I don't think the drug war works at all on any side of the argument, but it certainly makes no sense on the medicinal side. So I'm for doing those things that clearly the law allows. I'm for allowing the greatest amount of discretion on the particularly the medicinal marijuana side. I don't want to shut down what currently is working and doesn't seem to be causing a problem. I don't think you're going to have a lot of crime or violent crime, anyway, associated with medicinal marijuana. I just don't see violent crime associated with that side of the drug war. So I'm for doing those things that make sense, allow the medicinal side to work in a reasonable way, and allow the greatest discretion to the individual, so you don't have to have a huge collective. You can do it in small community gardens, backyard gardens. You can do it at that level without being forced into a very large scale, for lack of a better term, dispensary. I think that's a good way to go about it. And so those are my feelings on the matter.
Well, Tom, I think the issue that was brought up, it wasn't the fertilizers outside. It was those that would be used inside, like in the making of hash and going into the sewers.
Well, I don't think we're talking hash. We're talking medicinal marijuana.
But hash is allowed.
Hash
is allowed.
Well, as I
it's
stated
been considered the same thing.
As I stated in
I don't even know what hash is. So,
as I stated in the staff report,
is it corned beef hash or is it marijuana?
It's not made out of beef.
Oh, for Christ's sakes! Well, we should outlaw it then.
as I stated
And he
in the
went
staff
to Berkeley
report,
in the 60s. So.
that was not a recommendation that we made into the ordinance.
Okay, so we're not discussing hash, whatever
No,
it is.
it was
Okay.
brought up
I don't
under
know
the
what it
sheriff's
is.
comments.
That was one of the,
That was
a response to the sheriff.
So it wasn't outside, it was fertilizers used inside. In the
Okay, well, we have indoor plants too,
Potted plants.
but quite frankly, I don't know why we're forcing it inside. I mean, that makes no sense at all. I mean, it belongs outside, put it outside.
Okay.
Well, I think
Ban it from the inside?
Well, I think if
I
you
think the
allow it
intent-
outside, you don't, I think we're forcing it inside. I
the
don't think
intent
it's,
here, though, is when we have them in the commercial professional zoning district, that either they're not grown on site or it is inside. So if you want to make a distinction between the more agricultural, rural uses, then we can bring that back to you to show you that.
Okay, I mean, it's a plant and you grow it. I don't know why we have to make it more than, I mean, you know, on some of these high-rise buildings, they have a little planter box outside where they put flowers and different things. Well, if you wanted to grow 4 marijuana plants, who cares? I mean, no one's going to scale the wall anyway to get at them. I mean, you've got to get at them through the room. So I just don't see the scale in marijuana that turns it into sort of a significant agricultural crop. We're not dealing with corn. We're not growing soybeans. We're talking medicinal marijuana. What level of production is required to do that? I think it's a very low level of production. I mean, I just don't see it as being, as the growing part being a particular issue. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody can point out that, oh, no, we need 1,000 acres of marijuana to take care of the medicinal needs in Calaveras County, but I don't think that's true.
Thank you. Mr. Walensky.
While I know that we're dealing with a land use zoning subject, it seems that many global issues have come up during the course of our discussion, and I'd like to comment on a few of those before getting to the specifics. It's my observation that this country has tried prohibition before, and that the effect of it, from my perspective, which I actually had some personal experience with in a later time, but the mafia and organized crime rose under prohibition, that we actually created things that were, and I actually was a member of a union, the Sugar Workers Union, that was part of the vertical integration of a business that was started by the mafia during Prohibition, and they came to dominate even the people who produced it and kept wages low so they could make high profits. So the idea that we have organized crime in this situation and that it is having an impact on the lives of people even as far away from Mexico as, say, Calaveras County is something that I find a regrettable outcome of bad policy. I also see a problem with the whole idea that in a county that has this much methamphetamine both being produced, consumed, and actually leading to about 75% of our domestic violence and our jail population, our probation population, our assaults, and a variety of violent crimes. That, to me, this is a terrible distortion, and I don't know how it happened, but that we are still fighting the culture wars of the 60s right here in 2010 with that going on in our backyard is a distortion of I don't know, policy that is doing tremendous damage in our communities. And I actually, while I did read every single one of the incidents that have been compiled by our Sheriff's Department over the last, since 1996, everything that's ever happened in and around a dispensary, a collective operation, and whatever, it's only this thick. And under the title poisoning, it has a UPS driver who picked up a brownie in a dispensary and got dizzy. Okay? This is our version of the 1960s movie Reefer Madness. This is just crazy stuff, and if you were to actually take a look and compile since 1996 the crimes in the state of California that happened in and around pharmacies or convenience stores or gas stations or schools or Toyon Middle School, it would be much thicker. So I want our statistics, when we make policy, I don't want statistics compiled to distort things, but I want to know things like, is there a disproportionate amount of crime in a particular business or not? And I'd like to see us do more scientific evaluations than simply, resort to histrionics to try to affect policy. Another global issue is who makes policy and who doesn't. I believe law enforcement should inform policy. I think that there are many reasons to consider the law enforcement's perspective, but law enforcement actually has a primary responsibility to enforce laws that are made by policymakers. And there are already a number of policymakers that have weighed in on this. First, it was the people of the state of California voting for Prop 215. That's a bunch of policymakers, and they made their decision. Secondly, we have a whole lot of opinions now. The Attorney General is making policy. Although he's a law enforcement officer, he also has a policy position. We have the state Senate and the legislature, and signed by the governor, another bunch of policymakers, and now we have the Board of Supervisors. And we have the Planning Commission, which did something a while ago, but I'm not sure what. So those are policymakers, and I think in this county we need to recognize where administrative implementation leaves off and policy begins. So that's another global issue. Here's a couple of other things that I think are global and hard to deal with. One is the question of whether state and federal laws are eventually going to be reconciled. It certainly is not we're not going to affect that here today. We do have a reality to deal with. We do have those things I already mentioned that are now in our laps to deal with, and I think it behooves us to make good policy as best we can under uncertain circumstances. We also have something that is a global issue to me. It's the question of the integrity of our zoning codes. We create a zoning code, and we've had one in this, and actually I think the board had a certain degree of courage when it was early in the game, stood out and said, we recognize the vote of the people of California, and we're going to try to do as best we could under the circumstances, try to make some law. But now we have people who are saying, we'll do what we want regardless of that. And to some extent, this is a reaction. What we have in front of us is a reaction to that reality. And I think it's important that we reconcile people's practices with the codes that we create, and create codes that are consistent with good public policy. And we'll get to that in a minute. Finally, on the global issue, we have something that to me is, and somebody early on spoke to this, I believe. We had a couple of people over here that were articulate on it. I too am a cancer survivor, and I know what you go through when you have those kind of treatments and how your life passes before you, and it makes you try different things to see whether you can feel just okay. And that's a struggle, and a lot of us don't make it. We have a lot of casualties along the way. But I know when you're wasting away, that finding a way to be able to consume some kind of food is a real dicey issue. And far be it from me, I don't believe this is for policymakers. I think this is a fundamental right and is essential in a patient-doctor relationship, and government, which has gotten into it on Terry Schiavo and a whole lot of other cases, really needs to stay the heck out of that relationship. I just don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. We are all different. There are many circumstances, both in treatment and illness and personal composition, that requires a multiple approach to these kinds of issues. And I believe it's time that we recognize that, and that we're sophisticated enough as a government to be able to accommodate those kinds of things that medicine and science is telling us are important to people's survival. Getting in the way of that. So now let's get into some specifics. Indoor, outdoor growing. The Stockton version of this is my idea of the agricultural equivalent of don't ask, don't tell in the military. Hide it and it's okay, and we won't have problems. Well, that's maybe it's more relevant in a place where people are packed in wall to wall, door to door, row houses are close in, maybe there's some sense to it, but in a place like this, it's just inefficient. Growing leaves the worst carbon footprint, has all kinds of other issues. Why are we forcing that issue? I'm with Tom on that. Secondly, on the question of a number of other issues that we've dealt with here, hours of operation, I think, well, let me get into another aspect. There is a difference to me, and it's important that I think it be called out in whatever policy we make and whatever ordinance we do, between a storefront, which I think needs some form of regulation, and there is, despite the heavy criticism and the throw it out, I think there's a lot in here that can be salvaged in relation to storefront operations. All right? I think we need to separate our attention to that, which is, I would say, maybe 80% done, and separate that out. I believe that there's a basis for considering the collectives that formed long ago under Prop 215, and that we find ways to deal with that land use, not as a retail operation in commercial type zoning, but as what it is, which is growing stuff. And people grow things in their yards, people grow things in agricultural operations. There are different types of scale, and we should figure out the different gradations and what approaches that. And for that purpose, I think we should have a more multidisciplinary team that I believe was suggested early on in this, that gets together and really talks about the practical applications of this. Hours of operation and firearms and other issues should be done consistent with law and courtesy and consideration for neighbors. And I'm pretty sure we can figure that out if we really drop all the madness associated with this and get down to the practical applications neighborhood by neighborhood. Let's see if there's anything else here. I'm mindful of investments that people have made already, trying to do it the way we said it should be done. And I'm concerned that we have a number of operations through either confusion or malice that seem to be making this harder than it should be. There are background checks that we need to do. There are administrative processes and forms to fill out. I believe that we need to streamline this so as not to be using ministerial measures to try to make policy or leave it to one or another department to say, well, we think this is bad law or poorly formed law, and therefore we'll mess with it. That's not a good way to handle policy. If it's bad policy, challenge it, and as we have quite often in this room, see whether we can reform it to be better. The problem with the shifting sands legal setting is that it's going to have to get better. We can't write something and then 6 years later come back to it and expect it will be valid under these circumstances. We need to have regular reviews, and we need to make sure that everybody in this county and every department is playing their role in enacting policy as it's been made by this policy body. I guess I haven't heard a single person say this is a good ordinance, so I won't be voting for it today. I have my own reservations, but I do think we have a lot of work to do on it. And I think we ought to jettison Stockton and do something the Calaveras way. We're a rural county. We can do better. And one last thing. Separate and distinct from the question of medical cannabis is the question of America and how it deals with substance abuse. We got a problem that needs to be addressed. We won't address it in relation to medical cannabis, and loading this issue up with all that other stuff is sort of a mistake. But it's also a mistake to ignore the fact that we've got a lot of kids and a lot of adults and a lot of multi-generational families. You just go out in front of any, well, I won't even say where, but there are a lot of places where meth is being transacted as we speak. right in this county, right in the open, not in four walls and a roof. In my view, we've got some serious problems, and my hope is that people will understand the difference between people's behavior. If you're on medical marijuana, if you're using that to improve your appetite and stay alive, you shouldn't be out there on a buzz driving around. It's the behavior that's the issue, not the question of whether you are using that substance. And the same is true of half a dozen other drugs that people are using for the same purpose, actually, that impairs your ability to drive, your ability to safely operate a chainsaw, your ability to do many other things. So understanding the difference between a moral culture war, moral-based culture war of the 1960s, and the practical problems that we have right here in this county with our kids neglected, with substance abuse in the extreme, leading to a level of abandonment and child abuse, of the violent crimes that happen in relation to meth. These are serious issues that this county ought to be spending as much time on as we are trying to grapple with what Tom described accurately as a relatively simple issue. Enough said.
Was that over 5 minutes? Or?
It was actually, it was 8 minutes.
I just have a couple comments based on what Steve and Tom had to say and some of my own. Tom brought up the fact that it's a plant, it grows out in the open, and if they want to plant it in planter boxes, he doesn't have a problem with that. Well, I got to speak a little bit on the families that have children that are growing up, adolescents or teenagers. And I grew up in the era of the 60s also, and yes, I did smoke pot and I did inhale. But it was for recreational purposes while I was a teenager.
Well, when I
believe me, if I saw a pot plant growing out in the open in somebody's flower box, I would definitely at night or whatever go and know it was growing. I would go steal it. And so I am opposed to...
Is that today or back then?
And I'll admit to that. I think anybody here that wants to do that we're a teenage kid or whatever, would probably do that. So I do have some concerns over the fact that I think I understand where Stockton was going, because they are a suburban area and they have close subdivisions in small lots, but we also have some of that here also, that some of this may be growing. So I think it needs to be addressed, maybe not four walls and a roof, but the number of it, and not being out in the open where it can be seen by teenage kids or adolescents or whatever. I think that's just common sense that needs to be applied to it. I think this ordinance was aimed at, and though it didn't make a separation, it was aimed at storefront collectives, not wanting to use the word dispensary. And I think we need to go back and maybe target that a little bit more with our ordinance, and putting some conditions on those rather, and I'm not sure 4-2, I mean, that's something that we can discuss, I think, when it comes back to us, the number of it. The other thing I want to touch about is I'm not in favor of the $5,000 fee and putting it on this deposit and being used for whatever purposes. I'm trying to think of any other time that we've done that for a business to set up that has to come up with a substantial amount of money just to sit on deposit. I think we need to go back and revisit what our actual fees would be for this use, and maybe get it along the lines of those and come back with an amount that would reflect that. Let's see what else I have here. I'm not in favor of the guns and what was talked about here. I think whatever state, federal law has, I think that's what we need to go with. One other thing I wanted to bring up about the storefront dispensaries. My wife and I used to own a feed store, and the Board of Equalization made us keep a file when somebody came in and said that they were buying feed for a feed animal and there was no taxes on it, we had to have on file a card that they filled out stating their name, address, phone number, and what they were feeding. So if the Board of Equalization came over and audited us, that we'd be able to present these cards. And I think that's something we need to look at, maybe requiring the storefront dispensaries to have on file a copy of the 215 cards for the patients they're serving. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think Tom and Steve touched on a number of issues that I had written down here. So I think those are the only things I'd like to add to it.
Mr. Thomas?
I don't have anything to add, but I just wanted to ask Tom, how do I register as a libertarian, Tom?
Well, I'll take you over to the quarters office.
Okay, all right. I appreciated your comments. I agree with them with virtually everything you said. It doesn't seem to me that it's a big deal. We ought to, if it isn't really broken, let's not try to fix it. I'm not involved enough in the nuts and bolts of this to draft a motion today, but I think what I'm hearing is that we don't want to approve anything that we're seeing here today. I kind of like the idea of giving people an opportunity to participate in the final resolution. That makes sense to me, but I'm interested to hear what others of you think about how we draft that recommendation. I think it needs a timeline. I am not, I really have a strong affection for this county, and what I would least like to see is a medical marijuana dispensary in every commercial development in the county. I think that we have an obligation to ourselves and to our own self-image and our children to not create the impression that anything goes in this county. So that's the contribution that I would like to make to this effort, is just let's be reasonable about where it's located and the activities that are associated in and around them. Unfortunately, the way things move, I probably won't be around here to make much more of a contribution to this effort. But anyway, those are my thoughts.
And just a reminder that this is a land use ordinance. If any member of the public have any suggestions on how this could better be addressed or changes to what's existing in here, then I recommend that if you could put them in writing and give them to George White in the planning department, so that we can get, I know we have Mr. Liberty's comments, editorial and otherwise. But if you have specifics that you don't like a particular portion, you think it should be rewritten a certain way, please give those to Mr. White. My key things, which I've already said, not to be repetitive with the rest of the board, that this will require a conditional use permit. I think in the ordinance, we could address the types of things that could be addressed in a conditional use permit. No, it's really no different than what we have for any other conditional use permits, which could be the security issues, that the sheriff would address them on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we should be getting into what the sheriff might or might not want, as it should be addressed case-by-case. The safety issue, i.e., for example, the use of fertilizers inside the collective, if there's any manufacturing done, what happens with that? Again, that would be under a conditional use permit. And I think I've heard the board talk about the growing, where it would grow, and should there be something that if you have 2 plants, you can grow it in your little quarter-acre parcel, and if you're going to do 50 plants, you have to grow it in something that would be ag one. That's all would all be up for discussion But this is a land use ordinance. So we're not talking about the pros and cons of the use of medical marijuana. It's a given within the state of California. Are there any other questions or comments? And I guess I will leave it to staff to bring it back, hopefully before, I'd say before the snow falls, but where I live, it's already fallen, so
Marita?
maybe,
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
maybe
You wanna go first?
whatever George or Janice deems appropriate. I don't think we want to wait too long. Yes, Ms. Seagrave.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'd like a point of clarification only. You keep referring to it as conditional use permit.
Correct.
And the ordinance says it's an administrative use permit.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you for the correction.
But in my case, it's being treated as conditional use permit.
But an administrative use permit would still be the same. I mean, that the department, it would not go through to the planning commission or the board unless you wanted to appeal that. My understanding is staff wanted approval to regulate this. Is that correct, Mr. White? You wanted it as an administrative permit versus a conditional use permit?
Well, the current code calls out for an administrative use permit, so we aren't suggesting a change.
Unless there's no change. Okay, that's fine. That's even better yet. And so, Mr. Walensky.
George, while you're up here, while we're up here, can you rejoin us for a moment? I want to know whether you feel that you have clarity on next steps. There are several things in my mind that we may, as a board, that you may need from us. One has to do with, do we see a purpose in distinguishing and doing land use provisions for the two different models that we're talking about here? One storefront and the other is...
I think we're clear on that, yes.
Okay, so you can work on both and you feel
we will work on that.
Okay,
I'm not sure we'll come up with...
Secondly,
we'll
the venue for that, do you wish it to be departmental in nature, or it seems to me we have a number of departments, but we also have a number of different interests in the community. Certainly the interest of collectives on the one hand operating, and the interest of people who are trying to propose or interested in the idea of a dispensary type operation. Do you think that, having heard testimony today, it seems to me that paying some mind also to the patient and doctor interest, the health interests, would make a lot of sense for us. It's not just a land use issue, although we're deciding what land uses to use in relation to it. But I think it would be helpful to know what's going on out there and be informed about how not to screw up things that are working,
right,
as well as to prevent the harm from happening to the community at large in relation to these operations being done safely and with security. So how do you wish to proceed on that? Is it something that
I'm less clear on that. I think it's really a matter of whether the board desires to have a kind of a formal interaction with interested parties, including all the people that are here today potentially in other departments, or whether it's more of an informal interaction. If it's a formal committee kind of setup, it's obviously going to take longer. It's going to be more involved.
Yeah, I prefer, just for my position, I prefer an informal process that is inclusive.
Right.
I'd like to see us move on it quickly. I think there's a lot of smart people. I'd like to get their thoughts on it and then move timely back to the board. We've been kind of dawdling on this for a lot of months. We've got some pretty clear picture from the board here. Is the informal process workable for you?
No, I think that's clear, but I think because it is informal, those folks that want to engage in this process are going to have to self-identify and get information to us and say, I am part of this, I want to continue to be part of this.
So they would do that by contacting you?
By contacting me directly, as Marita suggested, yes.
That's what Marita said, gave direction to.
All right.
I thought it was clear.
I'm sorry, I missed that sort of.
Let's move forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the board? Thank you. I'd like to move to item 12.
Where are we?
Item 12, review of correspondence. Not what I should be.
doing?
Let the room clear, please.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear
The
what we're up
Exodus.
to.
I think Jeannie...
You don't want to hear where we're going?
They're going to tell their schedule. Get out of here fast.
I was headed to the dispensary in Valley Springs.
I'd just like to thank the board again for the opportunity.
Study session?
Yeah.
George is here. George.
I mean, we have a lot of
We can get
people
back
coming,
by
I'm sure, but...
I don't
Excuse me.
I don't believe we have
or you
Mr.
can
Hamilton in our presence.
Or you can move correspondence to
Yeah, let's just do correspondence later.
Should we...
Let's go eat.
Okay, we'll go eat, we'll do correspondence
You want to do Chinese in town?
when we come...
Where do you want to go, Gary? Russ, where do you want to go?
We'll do correspondence before we do our study session.
Yeah, let's go eat.
It started
Or whatever, Marita.
12:30 now.